In 2014, Bednar was a 14-year-old schoolboy, and like many children his age, he spent time online gaming and chatting to his friends. Unfortunately, he was targeted and groomed by 18-year-old Daynes, an extremely disturbed and dangerous man who murdered Breck. He then tried to cover his tracks by making the following call to the police.
Essex Police Emergency.
Hi there. Okay. Hello. I need police and a forensics team to my address, please.
What do you mean? What's happened?
My friend and I got into an altercation, and I'm the only one who came out alive.
Bednar was born in London on March 17, 1999, to Lauren and Barry. By 2006, Breck's parents had divorced, and he lived with his mother and his three younger siblings, 12-year-old triplets Carly, Chloe, and Sebastian. He was a student at St Bede's School in Red Hill in Surrey in the UK, and a member of the Air Training Corps 135 Squadron, also in Red Hill, and was described by those who knew him as a polite, warm and compassionate young man. However, Breck struggled to make friends, and, like many children, he spent his time online gaming, forming connections with those he met online. In mid-2013, Breck was introduced to an online gaming group by a friend at church, and this group was run by Daynes, an 18-year-old man who lived in Grays in Essex. There were only 8 members of this online group in total, and Daynes was in control, with him banning members of the group at will, and the group communicated via headphones. Daynes would boast to the group about his success as a software engineer. He claimed to live in New York, own various properties, and work for the government on top-secret projects. He also told them he had donated $2.5 million in Bitcoin to rebels fighting the government forces in Syria. Daynes claimed to be a millionaire, the owner of several companies that were valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Daynes would make these claims to all the members of the group, but it appears that as time progressed, he began to hone in on Breck, grooming him. Breck clearly loved the attention, believing that a wealthy tech entrepreneur was interested in him. He did not see the danger that he was in, or realize that the person he was talking to was extremely dangerous and a master manipulator. Daynes was born in 1986, and it's reported that he had a troubled life. He was an only child and his parents divorced when he was young. After the separation, Daynes' mother left the country, and he spent time living with his grandmother, and, it's also reported, spent some time in the care system. At the age of 16, so in around 2012, Daynes moved into a property owned by his grandparents. Daynes was described as a recluse by his neighbours, who barely saw him, with him spending almost all of his time sat in front of his computer gaming. It does appear that Daynes had some skill with software engineering, although I cannot find out whether he had qualifications or whether he was simply self-taught. However, he was not a millionaire, did not own any companies, and was clearly a manipulative and narcissistic man who made up lies of extreme wealth and success in order to gain attention, with his stories being in contrast to his real existence, where he was unemployed and living rent-free in his grandparents' house. Daynes also had a sexual interest in young boys and had already come to the attention of the police. This included in 2011, when he was arrested by the police on suspicion of 5 offences, including attempted rape, sexual activity without consent, as well as child pornography. This occurred when he was 15 years old, when he attempted to rape another boy. However, this was apparently investigated by Essex Police, but he was not charged with any offences. It appears that Daynes had set upon using gaming to identify and groom male children for sexual purposes, and, in 2013, he had set his sights on Bednar. Breck was clearly taken with the attention of Daynes, a man who was telling him that he too could become a successful software engineer and a millionaire like him because he had, quote, that kind of mind. Daynes told Breck that he was wasting his time with school and that they should go into business together. Daynes used his power to block people online to isolate Breck, with him blocking his friends and especially those who tried to call him out on his lies. Daynes would also get into Breck's head by telling him that his friends were talking about him behind his back and that he was the only one that he could trust. Lauren began to notice a change in her son's behaviour. He stopped going to church and socialising outside of his bedroom and would spend most of his time in front of the computer. She became concerned by the influence Daynes was having on Breck, with him frequently telling her all the lies that Daynes had told him about his wealth and success, which she was able to see through. Lauren tried to stop contact between Daynes and Breck by threatening to take away his computer, but Daynes would twist this into Breck's parents trying to control him rather than protect him. Daynes convinced Breck that his parents and friends were just jealous and that he was the only one that he could trust and the only one who could see his true potential. During arguments with his mother, Breck would tell his mother, "Well, Lewis said this or that," and she was becoming increasingly concerned that he was grooming her son. Daynes was clearly a skilled manipulator and was using classic grooming techniques, including establishing a bond with his victim, filling some sort of need in their life, making them feel special and unique, as well as isolating them from others. In December 2013, Breck's mother Lauren called Essex police, stating that their son was being groomed and she believed he was in danger. The police took no action. She did attempt to end the online relationship between Breck and Daynes, but was unable to control everything her son was doing. She limited his access to electronic devices and added parental controls to lessen his contact with Daynes. However, Daynes would help Breck circumvent all of these barriers and encourage him to lie to his parents to remain in control of him. In early 2014, Daynes began to put the next stage of his plan into action, meeting Breck. Daynes told Breck that he was dying and wanted to hand over his business to him. However, they needed to meet face to face at his property in Grays, Essex, so he could show Breck the ropes before the handover. They arranged a meeting on the 17th of February 2014. What happened on the 17th of February 2014 at Lewis Daynes' property in Grays, Essex was clearly pre-planned, as in the weeks leading up to this date, he bought duct tape, condoms, syringes and cable ties. On the directions of Daynes, Breck told his mother that he was going to stay at a friend's house for a sleepover near their home in Surrey, but he secretly took a train to Grays in Essex and, after taking a taxi to Daynes' property, stepped through the front door. What happened next will never be known with certainty, but it appears that soon after arriving, Daynes attacked Breck and tied him up. Police determined that sexual activity had taken place between the pair, but, understandably, they've never disclosed exactly what occurred, but I believe that this was likely non-consensual. Daynes then cut Breck's throat with this knife, causing cataclysmic injuries, resulting in him bleeding to death in minutes. Daynes then calmly took a shower and, shockingly, took pictures of Breck's dead body and shared them online with people, clearly to gain more attention. He took the bloody clothes he was wearing and put them in a rubbish bag. He also dumped his hard drives in water, clearly to erase the contents. And then, only then, he made the 999 call which I partially played during the intro, but here is a fuller version of that call.
Essex Police Emergency.
Hi there. Okay. Hello. I need police and a forensics team to my address, please.
What do you mean? What's happened?
My friend and I got into an altercation, and I'm the only one who came out alive.
Are you telling me you've killed somebody?
Yes, I am.
Right, and who am I speaking to?
My name is Lewis Daynes. I'm 18 years old, and I live...
Right, okay. And what's actually happened?
My friend came to stay the night with me yesterday, feeling very down, feeling suicidal. And I woke up this morning, he was in a mess. I tried to calm him down. I hugged him, then said that I was there for him. He shrugged me off.
Can you just bear with me a second? Don't tell me any more, okay? You're telling me he is definitely dead?
Yes, I'm telling you he's definitely dead.
Bear with me a second. Right, okay, Lewis, I need you to just take me back through that again. So what happened last night?
Okay. He came to stay with me because he was feeling down. I tried
What's
my
his
best.
name?
Breck. B-R-E-C-K. Bednar. B-E-D-N-E-R.
Sorry, B-R-E...
E-C-K.
Breck?
Yes.
And then his surname is?
Bednar. B-E-D-N-E-R.
Okay, so he came to stay with you.
Look, I can explain this to the officers when they get
I
here.
will just... I need to take these initial details.
I know. He came to stay with me the night. I did my best to comfort him. I woke up this morning. He was in a mess. I tried again.
Right, just slow down again, Lewis. I need to take these details. So did you have an argument with him last night?
No, we were fine.
You were fighting?
No, we were fine. We were fine last night. We both went to sleep. I said that we were fine.
Okay, but why did he come to stay with you?
Because he was fed up with his home life.
Right, because he was fed up with his home life.
He's had a lot of problems. I've known him for a long time. He came to stay with me. I was in Thailand last week on holiday. He was in Spain on holiday.
Okay.
We both got back.
So,
met up.
you both went to bed, and then what's happened this morning?
I woke up. He was just standing up. He was in a mess, hands on his face. I got up. I put my arms around him, and I said it was okay. He just shrugged me off and said no. I can't remember exactly what he said. He was going on about how he didn't want to go home. He was fed up with his life, and he didn't want to go.
Right,
and
okay.
I have a penknife on the side of, in my room, adjacent to my bed. I have a chest of drawers. After shaving the TV and stuff on there, I had a penknife on there, folded. He picked it up, opened it, and then lost control.
Slow down. Let me just take those details here. Penknife on the bedside table. Brett grabbed this.
Yes.
What, in order to harm himself?
No, in order to harm me. He opened it and then lost control.
To harm informant and opened it. What states he lost control.
In self-defense, put my left arm up to block him from stabbing me effectively. We struggled. I got him to the ground. He got up. I got the knife. Can you not interrupt me with this part?
Okay, go on.
Okay. This is being recorded anyway, isn't it?
Yep.
I grabbed the knife and I stabbed him once in the back of the neck, I believe somewhere near the brainstem. He turned around, tried to carry it on, and I think I stumbled on my chest of drawers. I fell over. I got back up, backed away, and then I don't remember exactly what happened, but the fight ended with me cutting his throat. I believe I turned around and I slashed his throat. Now, he fell face first on my bed. I tried to stop the bleeding.
Yep.
He fell onto the floor.
Yep.
I couldn't stop it. His throat was properly cut.
And he's still on the floor?
Yes. He fell onto the bed face first. I was trying to compress the wound at that time. And
Lewis, are you still in the room where Breck is?
No.
Where are you?
Look, don't interrupt me. Just let me explain this if this is being recorded. I didn't know what to do. I felt like...
Right, is the house where you are, is where you are and where Breck is, yeah? But you're in another room, are you?
Yes, I felt like taking my own life. I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is I dropped the knife in my hallway, I stripped down and just sat in the shower.
Right, you've left the weapon in the hallway?
Yes.
And have spent how long sitting in the shower?
I don't know. Look, are the police on their way? I can hear something.
They are.
Okay, I'm going to go and do my part. Please, thank you for your help.
Right, just listen.
Clearly, Lewis Daynes is a narcissist, believing that he was smarter than the police and that his story would be believed without any questions being asked. But it's clear that alarm bells were ringing the second he started speaking on this call. I don't know about you, but if I killed a friend, even by accident, I'd be in an absolute state and probably couldn't string two words together. I definitely wouldn't sound like I was calling to order a pizza or book a taxi. The lack of emotion in this call by a man who's standing with the dead body of a 14-year-old boy that he just murdered at his feet is shocking, and I think highlights the evil of Lewis Daynes. It's absolutely chilling. As well as the phone call, the police clearly found it strange that Daynes had taken time to clean himself, destroy evidence, post pictures of Breck's body before calling them. It seems that Daynes tried to change his story several times, claiming that Breck had tried to stab him and he'd killed him in self-defense, to then claiming that Breck had tried to kill himself with the knife, and when Daynes tried to stop him, his throat was cut, apparently by accident. However, none of this was believed, and the evidence did not stack up. Breck had clearly been bound, and there was no evidence of any altercation between the pair. Lewis Daynes was charged with murder. Clearly knowing that the case was airtight, Lewis Daynes pleaded guilty to the murder of Bednar and was set to be sentenced at Chelmsford Crown Court on the 12th of January 2015 before Mrs. Justice Cox. Daynes attended his sentencing hearing wearing a suit and showing no emotion during the hearing and keeping his head down. The only movement from him was him shaking his head when details of the case were read out, which he disagreed with, specifically the implication that the murder of Breck was underpinned by a sexual and sadistic motivation. Justice Cox stated, quote, "Having lured the young victim to your flat, you murdered him. You had befriended Breck with a number of other adolescent friends through an online community. Your contact with Breck increased in a sinister way. The precise details of what happened in your flat are unclear and may never be known. I'm sure this murder was driven by sadistic or sexual motivation." She then sentenced him. Lewis Daynes was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 25 years before he can apply for parole. Before analysing Lewis Daynes, it's necessary to outline his further behaviour after his imprisonment. Specifically, on the 26th of November 2015, so 10 months after his sentence, 2 blog posts appeared online entitled, quote, "BBC documentary, questions to be asked," and, quote, "open letter from Lewis Daynes." Both reported to have been written and posted by Daynes himself. They are sickening postings, and it's clear that the main purpose is to cause further harm to the family whilst continuing to minimise his behaviour. I won't read either out completely, but will read out parts and comments on these. So the second post starts with, quote, "The purpose of this statement is not intended to cause further distress to the family and friends of Breck. It is to put forward additional details unknown to the general public who did not know Breck or me. I have waited and respected the need for the family and friends of Breck to take full advantage of the media coverage and feel it's now time to release my own statement." Take full advantage of the media coverage. Their son was murdered. This is not media coverage that anyone in Breck's life wanted. And what right do you have to respond? The way this is worded is like a petulant child not getting attention, basically saying, "Why are you paying so much attention to them? What about me?" There's then lots of rambling basically stating that he's not a predatory sex offender against children. But then it becomes more sinister, with Daynes stating, quote, "Breck was driven away from family life and towards the virtual world. He drew comfort from the friends he made online. Our community members and myself learned that Breck suffered severe abuse at home. Abuse from someone who was supposed to nurture him and care for him. Someone who was supposed to encourage him and support him in his hopes and dreams and in the career path that he had chosen. A career path he shared with us, his online friends, who would listen and try giving advice on how to deal with the abuse. We learned, and some of us witnessed and recorded, that abusive individual regularly coming home in a state of intoxication and letting fly with drunken, abusive behaviour at Breck, shouting and humiliating him, often turning violent, causing Breck to withdraw further into that virtual safe haven that he found online. This he shared with other members and myself. His abuser is well known to police. Various people have previously filed reports of child abuse and domestic violence with the police, which are on record and easily verifiable." He then adds, quote, "On reflection, I believe this is why he formed this strong emotional attachment to me. He obviously drew some kind of comfort in having others and myself to confide in, to talk about his domestic problems and abuse. Someone who encouraged him and tried to help him deal with the abuse and mixed up feelings, trying to advise him to try to choose his own path and not be coerced into careers and fundamental religious beliefs he did not believe in or want to follow." So, Breck was being abused and Daynes was there to comfort him. His family drove him online, so basically they, not he, are ultimately responsible for his death. To be clear, there's no evidence of abuse, and even if there was, how does this justify what he did? Curiously, Daynes says he won't name the alleged abusers, likely because they don't exist. Daynes can't help continue to lie about his success, with him claiming that just prior to murdering Breck, he'd been offered a job abroad and had just returned from a successful business trip. Daynes appears to generally feel aggrieved with any implication in the media that his life was not perfect, including the state of his flat, with him responding to reports that it was described as untidy by saying, quote, "The police photographs actually show a very clean, tidy, modern flat inside and outside in a very nice residential street, the opposite of what they describe it as." Sickeningly, this second blog post ends with the lines, quote, "Breck, you'll always be in my thoughts. I hope you're at peace. I am so sorry. Your friend, Lewis Daynes." It appears likely that these posts were actually written by Daynes, and either he posted them himself, using a mobile phone he obtained in prison, or potentially he dictated it to some weak-minded individual on the outside, who then posted it on his behalf. However, regardless of how it got there, it gives us further information to understand the evil that is Lewis Daynes. Of course, we can only speculate, but I believe that he's likely what is known as a malignant narcissist. This is a subcategory of narcissistic personality disorder, which basically involves the sufferer being self-absorbed, having low empathy for others, and expecting special treatment from others due to their apparent superiority. However, this is often a mask, as sufferers usually have extreme issues with their self-esteem and such a fragile ego that they project to others the person they want to be as a way to desperately hide from the person they truly are. Malignant narcissism is considered a severe form of this condition, with sufferers displaying traits of often extremely abusive behaviour, victimizing others in order to get what they want. Traits of a malignant narcissist include being preoccupied with fantasies about beauty, brilliance, success and power, having an inability to handle criticism, being likely to take advantage of others to get what they want, having a lack of empathy for others, having no remorse for hurting others and no interest in apologizing unless it benefits them, and having a tendency to blame others for their own bad behavior. These individuals are practiced liars and manipulators, and will spin the most amazing tales of success, even if they're clearly lies, and, when confronted, they'll refuse to admit any fault and twist the narrative to make themselves seem like the victim. I think, based on these traits, it's easy to see why I think Lewis Daynes fits into this category. He is a man who demanded special treatment from others and felt entitled to engage in sex acts with young boys, and would manipulate and coerce anyone to get his own way. His coldness after killing Breck on the phone call to 999, I think, shows his complete lack of any emotion or empathy. He knew that society would frown on his behaviour, but I think he struggles to understand what the issue is. Hence why he felt the need to comment about the media's portrayal of him. His sole focus is on how others see him. He can't get away from the fact he killed Breck, but of course it's everyone else's fault. It's Breck's family's fault for alleged abuse, and he was actually Breck's protector and his friend. His ego is so fragile that he even had to write about the fact that his flat was clean and tidy, and continued to lie about how successful he was. Personality disorders are lifelong conditions, with sufferers engaging with therapy to manage the traits of their condition. However, narcissists do not tend to seek out or accept treatment, as it would involve acknowledging their issues, letting the mask slip. It may be that Lewis Daynes has a revelation in years to come, and shows genuine remorse, and tries to make amends for his behaviour, but I doubt it. I'm not sure he has the capacity to feel remorse, or any other emotion for anyone but himself. Lewis Daynes is a monster, and I think he'll continue to pose a serious risk of harm to others until the day that he leaves this world. The death of Breck destroyed his family's life, and Lauren has been transparent about her struggles to come to terms with the death of her son and best friend, with her explaining that she basically couldn't get out of bed for a year after his death. However, as with many of my videos, it's amazing how brave these people are and how someone keeps going when they've suffered the most horrific of losses. A parent should never have to bury their child. Her heartache must have been compounded when she found out about the blog posts I just mentioned. The family did try to get them taken down, but was stonewalled, with them being told they needed to speak to Daynes about removing them. I mean, seriously. Unfortunately, they still exist today. I won't link to them. They don't deserve any attention. Her heart must have further sunk when the Independent Police Complaints Commission cleared Essex Police of any wrongdoing in their handling of this case, specifically not acting on Lauren's call to them in December 2013. Lauren then set up the Breck Foundation, the link to which I'll put in the description. It's a really interesting website where you can volunteer or fundraise for the organisation and book a speaker to come to schools or churches to talk to children about internet safety. They also provide training for teachers on how to spot the signs of grooming. You can also donate, which I think, if you're looking for a cause to support, this would be a perfect organisation, because the whole focus of them is to protect children. And, as the stats say on the website, 99% of children went online in some form in 2021, and a third of children regularly play online games with strangers. I've signed up for a monthly donation, and there are various categories telling you what your donation can achieve. I have no affiliation with this foundation, and I'm just mentioning it genuinely because I think that organisations like this should be handed bags of money to continue their work, as it's clear not only that this foundation keeps Breck's memory alive, but his mother's sole focus now is to try and stop other mothers having to go through the agony that she had to go through. Breck, I'm sure, will be proud of her, and I sincerely hope that he is at peace. On Monday, the 24th of May 2010, Peter Gee, a caretaker at the Holmfield Court block of flats in Bradford in the UK, sat down to check the CCTV footage from over the weekend. What he saw would shock the nation, and was something he's unlikely to ever forget. Checking the footage for the early hours of Saturday, the 22nd of May 2010, he saw a man and a woman entering a flat. Minutes later, the woman was caught running for her life, being pursued by the man, who was armed with a crossbow. He then caught up with her, overpowered her, and dragged her back towards the front door of the flat. He then fired a crossbow bolt into her head, killing her, all in full view of the camera. The man then dragged the woman's body back into the flat. He then re-emerged, and this is what the camera caught. The man was Stephen Griffiths, a British serial killer who just killed his last victim. He ended the lives of at least 3 women between 2009 and 2010, and, when in court, proudly called himself the Crossbow Cannibal. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Stephen Sean Griffiths was born on December the 24th, 1969, in the market town of Dewsbury in West Yorkshire in the UK. He was the first of 3 children, to his mother Moira and his father, also called Stephen. The marriage broke down when Griffiths was 13, and the children and Moira moved into a council flat in the town of Wakefield. Griffiths' childhood was anything but normal, and it's clear he was exposed to extremely problematic behaviour which shaped his future crimes. Specifically, his mother Moira would leave the children alone most nights, going out whilst dressed provocatively, and she would return with different men each time. As one neighbour stated, quote, "She would go out in the garden stark naked and have sex with different men in full view of the neighbours. People would complain about it, but she didn't care." Her children, including Griffiths, would also witness this behaviour. Rumours circulated that Moira was a prostitute, and the ridicule from his classmates was something else that Griffiths had to deal with. In addition, Moira was also a criminal, and in 2007 she was convicted of falsely claiming £8,500 in benefits. In contrast, it appears that his father Stephen tried to help his son and saved every penny he could to send him to private school, specifically Queen Elizabeth Grammar School in Wakefield, where tuition is about £10,000 a year. As an aside, this is the same school where the acid bath murderer, John Haig, was educated before he went on to kill at least 6 people in the 1940s before dissolving their bodies in acid. Anyway, despite the prestigious education, it appears the damage had already been done, with Griffiths being described as a loner and strange by those who knew him. Griffiths appeared extremely socially awkward, had few friends, and made no real attempt to become part of his school community, or any community for that matter. Instead, it appears that Griffiths, by the point he was a teenager, had devolved into his own little world, which revolved around a fascination with serial killers, violent films, weapons, martial arts, and harming animals. Upon his eventual arrest, Griffiths was found in possession of hundreds of books related to serial killers, such as the Moors murderers, but he appeared to hold particular interest and reverence for the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, who murdered at least 13 women, mainly sex workers, between 1975 and 1980. Whilst at school, Griffiths was known to carry a knife in a briefcase and would frequently speak to his classmates about skinning birds and torturing animals. Griffiths spent 3 years at the school, leaving at age 16. I'll break here for a moment to highlight the red flags in this case, which were clear at a young age. So you have a man who clearly grew up in a neglectful household, likely not being exposed to appropriate social skills that he could mirror, who invariably had resentment, likely hatred towards his mother because of her abandonment of him and putting her own needs first, and exposing him to inappropriate sexual activity, and potentially being a prostitute, or at least acting in this manner, which led to him being ridiculed. This, I believe, led to a general hatred of women, and particularly sex workers. In addition, his mother appeared happy to break the law, and likely instilled these same values into her children. In response, Griffiths began to live in his own little world, revolving around violence, serial killers, and weapons, all of which I believe represented power and recognition to him, with him perceiving that, in order to get the attention he craved as a child, acts of serious violence, including multiple acts of homicide, were the way to achieve it, to be noticed. It didn't take Griffiths long to start falling foul of the law, with his first conviction coming when he was 17 years old, when he attacked a supermarket manager with a knife, when he tried to stop him shoplifting, something Griffiths would do regularly. For this incident, Griffiths was sent to prison for 3 years, and, during this time, he told various professionals, including a probation officer and psychiatrist, that he had fantasized about becoming a serial killer and believed he would begin killing people before the age of 30 years old. In 1989, at age 19, Griffiths was again back before the court for possession of an offensive weapon, specifically a BB gun, which he would apparently use to shoot birds, which he would then take home and dissect. Just 2 years later, in 1991, Griffiths was sentenced to 2 years in prison for holding a knife to a woman's throat. However, I haven't been able to find any information about who this woman was and the particular circumstances. Whilst in prison for this offence, Griffiths' mental health was assessed, and one doctor described him as, quote, a sadistic, schizoid psychopath. The term schizoid refers to a personality disorder which is characterized by an individual wishing to pursue solitary habits, having difficulty expressing emotions and reacting appropriately to situations, and being outwardly humorous, emotionally detached and cold to others, so someone who has little vested interest in society. This, coupled with the sadistic and psychopathic labels, indicates that Stephen Griffiths was an individual who had little connection to society, no empathy, remorse or compassion for others, and derived pleasure from inflicting pain and humiliation onto others. And on top of this, his obsession with violence, serial killers, and weapons, it's clear that this is the profile of a very dangerous man. The authorities agreed, but there was little that could be done. At that point, Griffiths had not done anything which meant they could take any real action against him. However, they knew he was a ticking time bomb. In around 1997, Griffiths moved into flat 33 at Holmfield Court, a block of flats in Bradford, which is where he will remain until his arrest, and where the CCTV footage I showed at the beginning of this video was captured. Griffiths essentially turned this property into his shrine to murder and violence, adorning the walls with weapons, including samurai swords and crossbows, and amassing hundreds of books about serial killers, as well as violent movies. In 1998, aged 29, Griffiths began dating a woman called Zita Pinder, who he dated for 2 years. She later described him as controlling, not letting her go out with her friends, and generally wanted to know where she was at all times. During the relationship, Griffiths told Zita that he lived with his parents, but she eventually found out that he had a flat and insisted that she went round. When she stepped in, she was disturbed by what she found. She later described coming face to face with his weapons collection and noticing a crossbow simply leaning against the television, as well as hundreds of books on serial killers. Zita stopped seeing Griffiths soon after this incident. Investigators have speculated that this rejection was what finally led to Griffiths turning his back on the world entirely, as it's clear that he was unable to live a normal life and maintain normal relationships. He therefore appeared to completely disappear into his own world, obsessed with violence and destruction. Added to this, I think this incident would have intensified Griffiths' underlying hatred of women and galvanised his behaviour years later. Griffiths expressed his contempt for society online and hinted at the monster he was, with him using the pseudonym Vampire and stating, quote, humanity is not merely a biological condition, it's also a state of mind. On that basis, I'm a pseudo-human at best, a demon at worst. Griffiths was known to be eccentric by his neighbours. He would often be seen walking as lizards he owned on Leeds, but he was also known to be rude and aggressive, and he caused significant issues for the other residents. In particular, it seemed he would try to befriend women, but when he made sexual advances towards them and these were rejected, he'd become aggressive and threatened to kill or harm them. Police were made aware of these concerns, as well as the fact that Griffiths was seen repeatedly reading books on human dissection. Between 2007 and 2009, the year the murders began, police were receiving ever-increasing levels of complaints about Griffiths' behaviour and demeanour, and on at least one occasion, they seized some weapons from his property. However, they believed there was little they could do, so the only thing that occurred was that new CCTV cameras were installed, with the hope of gathering evidence to evict Griffiths, or potentially had him issued with an antisocial behaviour order. These cameras, however, would eventually capture the murder of a young woman and lay bare the depravity of Stephen Griffiths. It should be pointed out that Stephen Griffiths was an intelligent, educated, and cunning man. In around 2003, he obtained a bachelor's degree in psychology and, in 2004, enrolled on a part-time PhD course at the University of Bradford, which he was studying when he was eventually arrested. His thesis was going to be on 19th century murders in the Bradford area, so essentially Griffiths was spending his entire time obsessing over killers and was taking qualifications to be called doctor and become an expert in this field. Anyway, his intelligence is also demonstrated by the planning that Griffiths took before he committed his murders. Firstly, teaching himself human dissection from reading books, but also getting to know his prey, with him starting friendships with sex workers in the local area and often inviting them back to his flat for a drink, meaning that, at the time of the murders, he was known within these circles as a friendly, unassuming man. This was clearly the superficial charm associated with Griffith's psychopathy, which hid his true, horrific intent, which became apparent in June 2009 when he put his plan to become a famous serial killer into action. Stephen Griffith's first confirmed victim was Susan Rushworth, who was aged 43 and worked as a prostitute in Bradford to fund her addiction to drugs. However, this was not all she was. This is not what any of his victims were, not even close. With regards to Susan, she was a mother of 3 children, a grandmother, and she had other family who dearly loved her. She was last seen alive getting off a bus on the 22nd of June 2009 in Bradford town centre. What happened to her is only known through Griffith's confession, with him stating that he met her and invited her to his flat later that day, and, when she was in the property, he beat her to death with a hammer and then dismembered her body in the bathtub. He claimed to have eaten parts of Susan's body after cooking them. He then disposed of her body parts, but has never revealed where. Confirmation of Griffith's story came when DNA analysis in his flat found significant blood splatter in the property, which was identified as belonging to Susan. At 10 p.m. on the 26th of April 2010, Griffith's second confirmed victim, 31-year-old Shelley Armitage, was last seen alive working in Rebecca Street in Bradford's red light district, close to the city centre. It's assumed that soon after this, Griffiths approached her and invited her back to his flat. When she stepped in, she was attacked, and it's believed that she was killed when Griffiths fired a crossbow bolt into her body, but also potentially stabbed her. Police later recovered horrific video camera footage of Shelley's naked and apparently lifeless body, which had been filled by Griffiths. She had the words, quote, "My sex slave," daubed in black spray paint on her back. Griffiths was heard in the video chanting, quote, "I am then Pryor. I'm the bloodbath artist. Here is a model who's assisting me." Griffiths later claimed he cooked and eaten parts of Shelley's body. Griffiths then took Shelley's body to the bathroom and dismembered her, dumping her remains in the River Aire, approximately 40 miles away from the site of the murder. At the end of May 2010, human remains were found in the river and subsequently identified as belonging to Shelley. This included part of her spine, which confirmed that she must be deceased. Her father had to identify his daughter from a screenshot that the police had taken from the video shot by Griffiths, but they were only able to show her face to him due to what he'd done to her body. Heartbreakingly, the family wasn't even able to say a proper goodbye to their daughter, sister, and friend, as almost none of her remains were recovered, and what was found was buried in a child's coffin. The last confirmed victim of Stephen Griffiths was 36-year-old Suzanne Blamires, who went missing on the 21st of May 2010. Suzanne was described as bright and articulate by those who knew her, and she started to train as a nurse when she left school. Unfortunately, she developed issues with alcohol and drugs and turned to prostitution in order to fund her addictions. Suzanne did not have an easy life. In 2011, 2 men were jailed for viciously assaulting Suzanne in December 2009, just 5 months before her death. These men attacked her while she was working in the red light district and repeatedly kicked her in the head and body. Her death is the one that was captured in its entirety on CCTV. And obviously, the full footage has not been released, but screenshots of her last moments are available. These show that at 2:30 a.m. on Saturday the 22nd of May 2010, Griffiths and Suzanne are caught on CCTV arriving at his flat and then entering the lift and walking towards his property. These images are haunting as they show the last seconds of Suzanne's life. Within 3 minutes, Suzanne is captured running away from the flat, with Griffiths stood behind her, having armed himself with a crossbow. This horrific image shows the murderous intent in Griffiths' face as he chases Suzanne and then fired a crossbow bolt into her head, killing her before dragging her body into his flat. It seems that Griffiths may not have noticed the relatively new CCTV cameras which had captured his every move, and, when he saw them, Rather than shy away, he used this as an opportunity to show his complete contempt for human life, sticking his finger up whilst holding the murder weapon. Griffiths set about dismembering Suzanne's body and again dumped her remains like rubbish in the River Aire, but again only small pieces of her body were ever recovered. Griffiths must have known that the CCTV footage would lead to his arrest, and on Monday the 24th of May 2010, after Peter Gee had seen the video, armed police descended on the flat and Griffiths was waiting for them. As he was arrested, he proudly told officers, "I've killed a lot more than Suzanne Blamires. I've killed loads." Clearly, in Griffiths' sick mind, the main event was about to begin. He now had a captive audience and was going to get the attention he'd always craved. Stephen Griffiths admitted his crimes immediately, and the following clip shows a portion of his interview where the police are trying to establish where he dumped the remains of one of his victims, although it's not clear which one.
And what sort of location have you put them in? If you can't tell us where, what sort of location have you put them?
I don't know. Where a robot, where a computer would put it. You know, a rational, emotionless aberration would put it.
Why did you feel the need to kill her?
I don't know. I don't know if I just sometimes you kill someone to kill yourself or kill parties. I don't know. That's like deep issues inside me.
So why did you feel the need to kill any of the girls? Van?
I don't know. Well, I'm misanthropic. I don't have much time for the human race.
There's so much to unpack here. Part of Stephen Griffiths' tone of voice is down to his Yorkshire accent, but it's also clear that he's indifferent to the suffering he's caused. He's almost bored by the interview. I imagine this is because he's having questions fired at him and he's not in control, which is not the sort of attention he wanted. Stephen Griffiths was subsequently charged with 3 counts of murder and remanded into custody to await his day in court. On the 28th of May 2010, Stephen Griffiths made his first appearance at Bradford Magistrates Court, a formality in the UK for a case such as this, before it's committed to the Crown Court. During these types of hearings, the accused simply confirms their name and their address. When asked his name, Griffiths said, quote, "The crossbow cannibal." This invariably caused shock in the court and sickeningly deep distress in the victims' families who were in the court to see the man who killed their loved ones. On the 21st of December 2010, Stephen Griffiths appeared before Mr. Justice Openshaw at Leeds Crown Court and entered guilty pleas to the murders of Susan Rushworth, Shelley Armitage and Suzanne Blamires. Justice Openshaw stated that Griffiths had committed, quote, "wicked and monstrous crimes," and stated, quote, "the circumstances of these murders are so wicked and monstrous, they leave me in no doubt the defendant should be kept in prison for the rest of his life." He then sentenced him. Stephen Griffiths was sentenced to a whole life order, meaning that he will never be released from prison. I'm tempted to refer to Stephen Griffiths as a pathetic, attention-seeking loser, and, whilst this is not very professional or a clinical description, I believe it's accurate. I've already given some of my thoughts about him, in that I think that his troubled childhood led him developing a hatred of women, specifically prostitutes, and, whilst he appeared to have contempt for society as a whole, these individuals represented, in his mind, an even lower form of life. Killing them served 2 purposes. First, it eradicated these type of people from society, but also gave them the attention he desperately craved, with him inevitably fantasizing about receiving the same notoriety as the serial killers he idolized. However, I don't believe that Griffiths was a cannibal. I've not seen any evidence, i.e. forensics of kitchen utensils, etc., which should indicate that this was true, Instead, I think it's interesting that Chaig, the acid murderer who went to the same school as Griffiths, made similar claims after his arrest, with him stating that he'd drunk the blood of his victims. He later admitted this was a lie. I think that he was trying to set up a defence of insanity to avoid the hangman. That one didn't work, but also to shock others and revel in his crimes. I think the same is true of Griffiths. Calling himself a cannibal was his way of shocking people, gaining notoriety and making himself feel big and powerful, whilst also compounding the horror that his victims' poor families had to endure. However, recognition and attention only last so long, and it's reported that Stephen Griffiths has attempted suicide on repeated occasions since his imprisonment, including going on a 120-day hunger strike in 2011. It appears that Griffiths would act in this manner when other high-profile prisoners were getting attention in the press, so he clearly was desperate to refocus attention to himself. Griffiths was also attacked in prison in 2019, during which a prisoner stabbed him in the chest with a wooden spear they'd made. If that's not poetic justice, I'm not sure what is. Stephen Griffiths is currently 53 years old and will spend the rest of his miserable life in prison, which is exactly what he deserves, hopefully slipping into obscurity and eventually nothingness. The women he killed are, unfortunately, defined by their profession in the press, which really irks me. It took me a lot of research to find information about them outside of this, but they were mothers, daughters, sisters, grandmothers and friends to people who loved them and who mourned their passing. They inevitably had aspirations to their life, but fell on hard times and were forced to make decisions which I imagine they hated, but saw that they had no choice. They were human beings who did not deserve to have their lives ended in such a horrific manner. Their names again were Susan Rushworth, Shelley Armitage, and Suzanne Blamires. These women deserve to be remembered. Their lives mattered, and I hope they rest in peace. Gary Heidnik was an American double murderer and serial rapist with a hatred of women, who, over a 4-month period between 1986 and 1987, abducted 6 women off the streets of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and held them captive in the basement of his home. He beat, tortured, and raped his captives, and whilst 4 of them miraculously survived, 2 were murdered, and one of these was dismembered. Heidnik was one of the inspirations for the character Buffalo Bill from the film Silence of the Lambs. But when you hear his story, I've no doubt you'll think he's a man far worse than any movie villain, and what he put these women through was worse than any horror movie, and like something out of a nightmare. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Gary Michael Heidnik was born on November the 22nd, 1943, in the Cleveland suburb of Eastlake in Ohio, to Michael and Ellen. He also had a younger brother, Trevor. Whilst Michael stated the boys were raised in a loving household, it appears it was anything but. Trevor later reported that Michael was extremely violent towards all members of the family and would beat his sons and his wife. Trevor said in an interview in 1987, quote, "Got to the point where we'd be afraid to pick anything up because he'd beat us if we dropped something like a glass or something. I was knocked unconscious once." When Heidnik was 3 years old, his parents separated and the boys went to live with their mother. However, this environment was also no place for a child, with their mother having issues with alcohol. She would often leave the children alone while she went out drinking, bringing home different men most nights. After 4 years, the boys were returned to the care of their father and his new wife, as his mother could no longer take care of them. So both of them went out of the frying pan and back into the fire, and Heidnik reported persistent emotional and psychological abuse by his father. Heidnik was a chronic bedwetter, with his father humiliating him whenever this happened, by making him hang the urine-soaked sheets out the window, in full view of the neighbours. Also, it's reported that Heidnik and his brother were forced to wear trousers with, I assume, fabric bullseyes sewn onto them, which children at school would kick. This compounded the abuse that Heidnik already suffered, due to him receiving a serious injury to his head when he was 6 years old, which left it misshapen after he fell out of a tree. In addition, Michael had particularly discriminatory attitudes and beliefs regarding African Americans, and instilled in his sons his racist views that these individuals were lesser forms of life due to the colour of their skin. Heidnik was a morose and solitary child. He made no effort to engage with other children and appeared very aloof. On one occasion, Heidnik was approached by a female student who asked him if he'd done his homework, to which Heidnik responded by shouting at her, saying she was, quote, not worthy to speak to him. Heidnik excelled academically and was reported to have an IQ of 148, which would put him in the exceptionally gifted category. However, he had no direction in life and seemed rudderless, with him flitting from one potential profession to another. This began at the age of 14 years old, when Heidnik enrolled at Staunton Military Academy in Staunton, Virginia, but dropped out 2 years later before graduating. He then returned to school, but then dropped out at the age of 17 and joined the United States Army. It appeared that, by this point, Heidnik had developed two obsessions: becoming an army officer and making money. Heidnik was described as an excellent recruit, but following basic training, he was rejected from several specialist positions. This included in the military police, and instead he trained as an army medic in San Antonio, Texas, and, as a side hustle, he lent money to fellow soldiers and charged them interest on these loans. Heidnik was then transferred to a field hospital in West Germany. However, things began to fall apart for Gary Heidnik in late August 1962, at the age of 19, when he went to the sick bay, complaining of dizziness, blurred vision, and nausea. It's also noted that Heidnik began showing signs of mental illness, and although it's not clear what he was suffering from, given the fact he was prescribed antipsychotics, it's likely he was showing signs of schizophrenia, which potentially included him experiencing delusions and hallucinations. However, there are some who believe that he faked this diagnosis to get a discharge from the army. However, it should be noted that mental illness does appear to have been a common factor in Heidnik's family, with his brother Trevor spending time in mental institutions and attempting suicide multiple times during his life. And in 1970, Ellen, his mother, committed suicide by poisoning herself. With regards to Heidnik, he would be admitted to psychiatric hospitals no less than 20 times between 1962 and 1987 due to repeated suicide attempts. In October 1962, Heidnik was transferred to a military hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. This is a condition characterized by someone who chooses to be alone and chooses to pursue solitary habits, whilst having little or no desire to interact with others outside of necessary interactions. They also have difficulty expressing emotions and reacting appropriately to situations, and they're often outwardly humorless, emotionally detached, and cold to others. It appears, due to this diagnosis, Heidnik was honourably discharged from the army and given a disability allowance. Heidnik had served a grand total of 13 months serving his country. Shortly after his discharge, he became a licensed practical nurse and enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania, only to drop out a single semester later. He worked at a VA hospital in Coatesville, but was fired for poor attendance and rude behaviour towards patients, with him showing no empathy towards them and being aggressive generally towards staff and patients. It appears that despite his high intellect, Heidnik was unable to hold down a job or actually pursue a career, and he appears to have been quite entitled. It seems like he wanted to be handed professions on a plate, and when he found out this wouldn't happen immediately and would require some work, he would leave. So, with the army, when he realised he wasn't going to be promoted to a 4-star general by a week on Thursday, he got bored and wandered off. It's important to note the types of jobs or careers Heidnik was pursuing, with them all being ones where someone has power over another, whether this be an officer in the armed forces, a police officer, or a nurse. In October 1971, Heidnik set up a church called, quote, the United Church of the Ministers of God. Initially, the church had just 5 members. In 1975, he opened an account under the church's name with Merrill Lynch. The initial deposit was $1,500, but through shrewd investment, within 10 years Heidnik had turned this into $500,000, and the church eventually grew to 50 devoted followers, led by the self-anointed Bishop Gary Heidnik. It appears this church was, in part, set up so that Heidnik could avoid paying taxes, but I think it served another purpose. It gave Heidnik a captive audience. It gave him people that would hang on his every word, and give him the sense of power he'd been attempting to find throughout his life up until this point. As his church gave him money and sense of power, Heidnik stuck with it. It was still active at the time of his arrest in 1987, with then contacting investigators to ask whether Bishop Heidnik would soon be released to lead the congregation. Some authors say that Heidnik's ultimate intention was to turn his church into a cult, and I wouldn't be surprised, as it's clear he was a man who wanted power and others doing exactly what he said, following his every command without question. However, whilst Heidnik professed to speak the word of God, his behaviour towards others was anything but holy. It appears that Gary Heidnik's first serious brush with the law was in 1976, when, after a disagreement with the tenant at a house he was renting, he fired a gun at him, with the bullet grazing his face. It's reported that in the 1970s, Heidnik would begin relationships with African American women, with him telling others that these women, quote, treated him better than whites ever did. However, he would also specifically pick women with severe learning disabilities. This, I think, is a combination of Heidnik's racist beliefs, his narcissism, and further evidence of him wanting to place himself in positions where he controlled people. Due to his childhood, it appears that Heidnik considered African Americans to be inferior and therefore less of a threat to him. When you also add in the disability aspect, in his mind, Heidnik likely felt there was a massive power disparity in these relationships, with him being totally in control of them, being able to use and abuse his partners at will. One such woman was called Anjanette Davidson, who had significant learning disabilities. Anjanette had a sister, Alberta, who lived in a mental health institute. Alberta was a 34-year-old woman who had the mental capacity of a 5-year-old. One day in 1978, Heidnik signed Alberta out of the institution, apparently on day release. He then took her back to his property and kept her chained up in the basement. Over the next 9 days, he repeatedly raped and sodomized Alberta. Where she didn't return, the institution called the police and a search was conducted of Heidnik's property, but nothing was found, and he bought time by claiming that he put her back on a bus home. When a second search was conducted, Alberta was found confined in a small storeroom in the basement. After Alberta was medically examined, she was found to have clear signs of sexual assault, including tears in her vagina. She had also contracted gonorrhea. Heidnik was subsequently charged with kidnapping, rape, forced imprisonment, unlawful restraint, and interfering with the custody of a committed person, amongst other offences. At his trial in November 1978, Heidnik pleaded not guilty, and heartbreakingly, Alberta, due to her cognitive difficulties, was deemed unfit to testify. So, as opposed to a list of charges which would have placed Gary Heidnik behind bars forever, many of the most serious charges had to be dropped. He was eventually only convicted of unlawful restraint, interfering with the custody of a committed person, and recklessly endangering another person. Psychiatrists who assessed Heidnik indicates he showed no remorse for his actions and was extremely likely to commit similar or worse offences in the future. Heidnik was sentenced to 3 to 7 years in the state penitentiary, eventually serving 4 and being released on March the 24th, 1983. It isn't clear whether Heidnik's initial thinking around targeting mentally disabled women include the fact that, if he was caught, he could simply plead not guilty and they would not be able to testify against him. I think this is likely. However, even if this wasn't the case, he now had an example of the power of this strategy, with him likely thinking, yeah, I went to prison, but I served 4 rather than 24 years. I've no doubt that Heidnik was looking for loopholes and ways to avoid detection and punishment, whilst planning and fantasizing about his ultimate goal, to have control over completely subservient women who would be his personal sex slaves. Soon after his release from prison, Heidnik began using a matrimonial service and began to communicate with a woman called Betty Disto in the Philippines. In September 1985, she flew over to the US and married Heidnik in Maryland on the 3rd of October 1985. No doubt Heidnik thought that she, due to her ethnic origin, would be subservient and easy to control. He was wrong. Betty would frequently voice her concerns and hold her husband accountable for his appalling behaviour, which included him forcing her to watch whilst he had sex with other women. During their brief marriage, Betty was raped and beaten repeatedly, and it was only with the help of the Filipino community in Philadelphia that she was able to escape the marriage in January 1986. Soon afterwards, Heidnik was arrested for assault, indecent assault, spousal rape, and involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, but all charges were dropped when Betty, likely through fear, did not attend the court case. At this point, I imagine the wheels in Heidnik's twisted mind were turning, with him realising that if he wished to have a harem of women at his command, he needs to return to his original victim typology and replicate the behaviour which had given him some limited success before, specifically, in the case of Alberta, confining this woman in the basement. If he could find similar vulnerable women and bring them to his basement, he would have the on-demand sex slaves he was desperate to acquire. By November 1986, Heidnik decided to put his horrific plan into action. In total, Gary Heidnik abducted 6 women from the streets of Philadelphia, with the first being 25-year-old Josephina Rivera, who, on November the 25th, 1986, was working as a prostitute in order to support her family. She was picked up by Heidnik in his white Cadillac, where he paid her for her services. After this, they went to McDonald's, where Heidnik bought Josephina some coffee. Josephina then agreed to a further trade of sex for money, but this time Heidnik wanted to do it at his home, to which she agreed. So Heidnik drove Josephina to 3520 North Marshall Street. Josephina later recalled being suspicious when she got to the home, noticing that in the front door was half the key, with Heidnik having the other half, and the door could only be opened when these two parts were held together. What Josephina didn't realise was that this was so that the keyhole could not be seen through, and the lock was essentially blocked, meaning it could only be opened from the outside. After having sex in the main bedroom, Josephina went to put her clothes back on, and Heidnik then grabbed her by the neck from behind and began to choke her. She begged him to stop, but instead, he handcuffed her wrists and pushed her down the stairs to the basement. Heidnik then got a shovel and began digging a hole in the floor of the basement, whilst telling the handcuffed Josephina that he was planning to capture 10 women whom he would force to get pregnant, and then they would raise his children. She was then pushed through the hole. She tried to escape but could not, and Heidnik left and didn't return for 27 hours. But when he didn't return alone. Sandra Lindsay was also 25 years old, and she was extremely vulnerable and was a patient at a care facility called the Elwyn Institute. Sandra was already known to Heidnik, as he'd previously raped her in the facility where she was staying, and she'd fallen pregnant, but had an abortion. On November the 26th, 1986, Heidnik took Sandra from the Elwyn Institute and brought her back to his home. Heidnik told Sandra to write a letter to her mother, saying she'd left the institute and that she was fine. He then went to New York and posted this letter. However, Sandra's mother did not believe the contents and went to the police. She must have known about Heidnik, as she gave the police his address and said her daughter was likely being held there. Tragically, the police did nothing, assuming Sandra was just another runaway. On the first night that both women were together, they were viciously raped and beaten by Heidnik, and this pattern continued each and every day. They were kept naked and had to huddle together for warmth in the unheated basement. They slowly began to fall ill due to hypothermia, starvation, and dehydration. On the 22nd of December 1986, 19-year-old Lisa Thomas was walking to a friend's house when Heidnik pulled up alongside her and asked if she was working the streets. Lisa was not a prostitute and was offended. Heidnik said he would take her wherever she wanted as a way to apologise. Eventually, the pair ended up going to dinner and then back to his house, where he drugged her wine, and Lisa soon fell unconscious. She woke to Heidnik dragging her to the bedroom, where he raped her. He then handcuffed her and threw her in the pit in the basement. On the 2nd of January 1987, Heidnik abducted 23-year-old Deborah Dudley. It's not known how he came across her, but it appears that she was potentially homeless at the time. Deborah fought every step of the way, and Heidnik had trouble subduing her and placing her in the hole. She was viciously beaten and eventually took her place with the other captives. 18-year-old Jacqueline Askins was a sex worker who Heidnik picked up on the 18th of January 1987. After agreeing to money for sex, Jacqueline went to Heidnik's home and, after having sex, he strangled her, cuffed her, and forced her into the hole. So by the 18th of January 1987, there were 5 women chained up in Gary Heidnick's basement. By this point, the first woman he abducted, Josefina Rivera, had been living this nightmare for 52 days. Heidnick would rape and beat the women without mercy. He'd also try to divide and conquer them, with him assigning one as the leader when he went out. And when he got back, he would ask the leader which of the women had misbehaved. If no one was singled out, they would all be beaten. No doubt in order to heighten their terror, Heidnick would shove sharp objects into the women's ears in an attempt to deafen them so they could not hear him coming, but also so they didn't know when he'd left, so they couldn't try to escape. Heidnick would feed the women as and when he pleased, and his erratic behaviour appeared to dictate how often they would be fed and what they would receive. On some days they'd get nothing, on other days they might get dog food, but on one occasion to celebrate one of the captive women's birthdays, he provided them with Chinese food and champagne. However, the women were malnourished, dehydrated, suffering from hypothermia, battered, bruised, and in considerable pain, with several of them becoming seriously unwell, especially Sandra Lindsay. In February 1987, Sandra angered Heidnick by trying to remove the planks of wood that sat over the hole in the basement. In response, he handcuffed one of Sandra's wrists to a beam in the ceiling and left her hanging there for days. Convinced she was pregnant with his child, Heidnick tried to force feed her in order to keep the child alive. But, in a weakened state, Sandra's body was beginning to give up. Eventually, she died, and when the handcuff was removed, she slumped to the floor. Josefina said when she saw Sandra was dead, quote, "I was broken-hearted. Me and Sandra were close. We spent so many hours together in the hole." Heidnick, the monster that he was, with cold efficiency, then sought to get rid of Sandra's body. He forced the other women to be involved in dissecting her body and used a power saw to remove her limbs, with him putting Sandra's legs and arms in the freezer, marking them as, quote, "dog food." Heidnick cooked her ribs in the oven and put Sandra's head on a stove to boil. Heidnick showed Deborah Dudley, who had fought him so hard when she was abducted, Sandra's head on the stove and warned her that she would end up the same way if she defied him. There's a rumour that Sandra's remains were ground up, mixed with dog food and fed to the other women, but this isn't backed up by the evidence. The putrid smell from cooking Sandra's body parts led to neighbours calling the police, and, when they attended, Heidnick simply said that he burnt a roast, and they left. Whilst raping and torturing these women, Heidnick would occasionally leave the basement, go upstairs in his property, and hold sermons for his church congregation before returning to continue his vile abuse. Heidnick would also use electricity to torture the women, applying a live wire to their chains, giving them electric shocks. On March the 19th, 1987, Heidnick put 3 of the women, including Deborah Dudley, into a pit filled with water whilst they were wearing chains. He then applied mains current to their bindings, and, as a result of this, Deborah died. By this point, Josefina realized the only way she was going to survive was to pretend to be compliant, and she began to convince Heidnick that she was enjoying her time with him, and she was given more trust and more freedom. This included her assisting him in removing Deborah's body from the property and dumping her remains, and agreeing with him that they needed to abduct another woman in order to replace the 2 who had died. As a result of this, Heidnick would take Josefina out in his car in order to look for women to abduct. On the 23rd of March 1987, they came across 24-year-old Agnes Adams, who was known to both of them, as Heidnick had previously engaged in her services as a sex worker, and Josefina from when the pair had worked in a strip club together. She was taken back to the property, assaulted, and forced into the hole in the basement. This appeared to cement Heidnick's trust in Josefina, and on the 24th of March 1987, she asked if she could go visit family, and she promised to return with a new woman for his collection. Heidnick agreed and drove Josefina to a petrol station and said he would wait there while she went to see her relatives. Josefina then walked a short distance away and called the police. When they arrived, they saw the imprint of restraints on her leg and thankfully believed her. The police then drove to the petrol station and arrested Gary Heidnik. The police then went to Heidnik's property and opened the basement to release the surviving women. This stunning and horrific picture shows what the officers found when they peered into the hole. The police were able to recover the body of Deborah Dudley and were able to recover some of the body parts of Sandra Lindsay. This included removing her arms and legs from the freezer. They also found pieces of her thigh, skin, and muscle, all neatly wrapped. Over 27 pounds of dismembered human remains were recovered in total. To close this section, I want to play a short clip of Josefina Rivera talking about her experiences in around 2014.
Here with me now is Josefina Rivera. Thank you so much, Josefina. I've watched this. This is the first time that I've actually seen this, and I'm trying to hold back my tears.
Right.
So I can't even imagine what you endured.
We endured a lot. We really endured a lot. I truly endured a lot, especially in the beginning, being the first one. I could just so remember just sleeping with handcuffs behind my back every night and chains on my ankles, and I would wake up and just think it was a dream, you know.
Or a nightmare, really.
A nightmare.
Right. During that time, what kept you going? What kept you alive throughout all the torture and the cruelty that you endured on a daily basis?
Through the strength of God, and I just said I'm going out of here the way I came in here. If I walked in here, I'm going to walk out of here.
So that was really that's what kept you focused
yes,
on that you're going to get at, the sense of determination.
Right.
What was the interaction between you and the other women?
It was really, really very difficult. I mean, we're in a situation where none of us know each other, and each one is dealing with different mental stability. And I tried my best, being the first one down there, trying to calm everybody that came down. It didn't always work, but you try to, sit down and talk and try to keep them, you ask them about their family and their kids and their life, and, try to make it a little bit normalcy for them as much as possible, and try to say, well, hey, you're going to be all right, we're going to try to get out of here alive. And it was difficult at times. It was. When Sandra died, me and Sandra had been there from the beginning, so when Sandra died, it just really broke my heart, and it just really made me see the severity of Gary Heidnik.
Did you think you were next after she died? Did you think that he was going to go after you?
Oh, at that point, it was like anything could happen. It was like a day-by-day thing. It was just, each day was worse than the day before. And it just never seemed like it was getting any better.
Did you ever think, Josefina, that you were going to get out of there? Did you ever plot it? Did you ever talk
I didn't plot it. I really didn't realize how much Gary Heidnik actually liked me and how much I was getting through to him until the last few days. I knew I was going to get out of there one way or another. I mean, that was like my ultimate goal, was to make sure that I got out safely and he couldn't get to me and he couldn't get back to the other girls and get rid of them, and so I don't know if there was a plan, but it worked out.
But a sense of survival that you
Yes.
had to keep yourself going throughout, no matter what.
Exactly,
That time.
and trying to deal with Heidnik himself, and then trying to deal with the other girls, and trying to put something together. It was amazing.
Now you still have some injury from what he did with your ears. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, he found out that we could hear him underground coming in and out, his car pulling in and out of the driveway, because his basement set underground and we could hear him walking through the house. So he decided to take screwdrivers and damage our eardrums with screwdrivers.
Did you?
To dent our ears so that we wouldn't be able to hear him coming in and out.
And you still have difficulty with hearing?
Oh yeah, everything I listen to is loud.
Now, you have children, and you were reunited with your children.
Yes, I
recently.
was.
How's
Ricky and Zornay, I put up for adoption right after the Heidnik thing happened. At the time, the foster parents and Zornay and Ricky were very close, and they were in a loving home. I personally, mentally or physically, wasn't mentally capable of taking care of them. So my decision for them to allow them to adopt them was, was a good thing. Me and LaToya stayed in touch. She came back and lived with me when she was 12, and we stayed close.
Remember what I said about Gary Heidnik having an almost genius level IQ before? Well, on the 23rd of April 1987, he walked into court and pleaded not guilty to all offences. His initial defence? The women were already there when he moved in. That's it. This later appears to have changed him, claiming he knew about the women, but they'd killed each other. Heidnik also made claims of cannibalism, but this was not backed up by evidence when forensic analysis of cooking utensils was undertaken, and it appears this was likely part of an insanity defence. The question of mental illness was central to this case, but the brave testimony of the surviving victims showed how methodical and planned these offences were. In addition, it was pointed out that Heidnik was competent enough to make hundreds of thousands of dollars from investments and run a church for over 10 years. The jury didn't believe a word of it, and on the 1st of July 1988, Gary Heidnik was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of kidnapping, 5 counts of rape, 4 of aggravated assault, and 1 of involuntary deviant sexual intercourse. He was then sentenced to death. Gary Heidnik spent over a decade on death row and never admitted any guilt or showed any remorse for his crimes. In January 1999, he tried to escape his date with the executioner by attempting to take an overdose, but this was unsuccessful. Before his execution, Heidnik reportedly claimed that he wanted to be executed because the execution of an innocent man would stop the death penalty in America. Just before 10 p.m. on Tuesday, July the 6th, 1999, after a last meal of 2 slices of pizza and black coffee, Gary Heidnik stepped to the death chamber at SCI Rockview and was strapped to the gurney. At 10:12 p.m., the execution began and the lethal injection was administered. He was pronounced dead at 10:29 p.m. And, when this occurred, one of the witnesses reportedly shouted, quote, "Thank you, Jesus." He made no final statement. Before talking about this monster, I want to play a short clip of him speaking during an interview after his incarceration. Look at this man's eyes. I, for one, find them terrifying.
How much verbal exchange did you have with the girls down there in the basement?
At first, I tried to make it nice, right?
Yeah, how did you do that, Gary?
I was holding parties there, for one thing. I had a Christmas party and a New Year's party.
Heidnik told agents Douglas and Ray that he had a routine for the women he held captive in his basement.
8, they go down in the hole in the morning. Board goes over the top of the hole with the sandbags and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they stay down there till roughly about 8 at night. Okay. Now, on this particular day...
You got a radio down here, right?
Oh, yeah.
Playing real loud?
Yes.
Why is that? To drown out any noise?
Right.
In case because you're leaving the house sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, so you don't
I was... You know, I'm not holding nothing back. I realize that's incriminating. That's incriminating for me to say that in a state of mind. I was conscious enough to know that was a conscious act on my part, and that was essentially the reason.
To drown out that noise, for sure.
Well, they might like a little entertainment too, you know.
The radio didn't stop the women from screaming for help, so Gary Heidnik tried shocking them into silence with electricity.
You do say that you were electrocuted as punishment.
Yeah.
And you did that systematically for some time.
No. Only several days. Nothing was working. I was trying to find something that worked that would make them shut up to stop hollering.
So I could progressive kind of infliction of pain on these women.
I was trying to find something that would make them behave.
But it was painful to them.
I hope so. I don't mean I hope so, but I mean, you know, that's what I was trying to achieve, you know, to make them behave.
After one of the victims died from torture, Heidnik told Douglas and Ray he didn't know what to do with the body.
I'm sitting there, you know, trying to figure out what the hell to do, you know. What the to do, you know. I started chopping up the body. It makes me sick just thinking about it. dismembered the body, and I started burning it on the stove and in the oven and stuff, and that was when you got the big smell and all.
You're trying to destroy the evidence.
Right.
See, some people.
I consciously knew I was trying to hide the evidence.
The lack of remorse and delusion in this man is truly horrifying. Gary Heidnik is reported to have been one of the worst, most frightening killers the FBI agent John Douglas ever spoke to. He's the man whose career was the basis for the television series Mindhunter. Remember, he interviewed some of the most depraved and vicious killers of modern time, including Edward Kemper, John Wayne Gacy, and Ted Bundy. So for Heidnik to be at the top of this infamous list is really saying something. I would agree that this man's crimes are particularly heinous, but why did he do it? I think that due to his traumatic childhood, Heidnik developed a general hatred of society, but in particular women, likely due to the lack of care from his mother. Also, due to the racist use of his father, I believe that Heidnik considered those from any ethnic background, but particularly African Americans, as an even lesser form of life. Likely due to his intellect, Heidnik appears to have felt that he was special and worthy of great things, and that others were not worthy of him. Given his gifts, I think that he assumed that people should just hand him power, and so he tried to integrate himself into society by applying for these types of positions. But, due to his own arrogance and his lack of any social skills, he was unable to obtain them, and also likely because he wasn't given what he wanted quickly enough. So, he took matters into his own hands, created scenarios in his own life where he could feel ultimate power over people, reinforcing to himself how superior he was. This included him beginning relationships with women with intellectual disabilities, knowing they were no match for him intellectually. Whilst he likely felt very powerful in these situations, he was essentially an utter coward, a tiny little man who would rape and abuse, in some cases, women who had the mental age of children. Whilst there may have been a financial motivation to him setting up his church, I have no doubt he had aspirations of being a cult leader, having ultimate power over people, commanding their every move, using them any way he wanted, and ultimately ordering their suicide if he deemed it necessary. As he amassed his religious congregation, he also collected women, like objects, using them to get his sexual kicks, and no doubt getting off on the fact they were powerless, he could kill them at any moment. I think that Gary Heidnik considered himself a god, and wanted mere mortals to fear him, and acknowledge his superiority over them. What Heidnik was ultimately planning to do is anyone's guess. Perhaps he was going to breed a colony, create some cult from the ground up. However, what I find so perfect about this case is that one of these African American women, who he considered so beneath him, outsmarted him, manipulated him into believing that she supported his lunacy, and she was eventually able to take him down and save the lives of others. Just after midnight on Friday, March the 13th, 2009, a 999 call was received reporting a man had collapsed at a property at 14 Arthur Street in the town of Chiltern in County Durham in the UK. When paramedics attended, they found 35-year-old Andrew Gardner, a vulnerable man due to underlying cognitive issues, dead in the living room. The paramedics were told that Andrew had been assaulted in a bar fight, had come home and collapsed, but the police were quickly called, but it was noted that Andrew was malnourished and his body was covered with new and old injuries. Andrew had been the victim of domestic abuse for years, and his last few weeks alive had been a living nightmare, during which time he'd been tortured, including being burned, starved, beaten, as well as having noughts and crosses carved into his body, using him as some sort of human game board. 3 people were responsible: 24-year-old Simon Nichols, 44-year-old Stephen Martin, and the ringleader, 28-year-old Claire Nichols, a sadistic, psychopathic manipulator who not only inflicted horrific injuries on Andrew, but did this in front of her young children, and sickeningly, even encouraged them to participate. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Andrew Gardner was born in around 1974 in the town of Gateshead in Tyne and Wear, in northeast England, to Ken and Jean Gardner. He had significant learning disabilities, which were diagnosed when he was a child. Andrew had a close relationship with his 2 brothers and his parents, and they were a very tight family. There's no indication that Andrew was ever subject to or experienced violence or abuse in the home. In fact, his childhood was very loving. However, in school, he was the subject of bullying, with his peers taking advantage of him due to his naivety and kind nature. But, despite his own experiences of abuse, Andrew was described as a loving, polite and quiet young man who was never violent and who would try to diffuse situations if he could. He had a kind heart, but unfortunately was always a target of those looking to exploit him. In 2005, at the age of 31, Andrew met 23-year-old Claire Nichols, a single mother with 3 children, who had a history of violence towards intimate partners and an evident history of sadistic behaviour. Unfortunately, this meeting would end in Andrew's death just 4 years later. Claire Nichols was born in around 1982 and was raised in Portsmouth in Hampshire. Given that 2 of the perpetrators in this case have the same surname, I'll refer to her by her first name moving forward. In contrast to the happy environment that Andrew grew up in, Claire was raised in a dysfunctional home, repeatedly witnessed domestic abuse between her parents, who eventually split up. Claire left the family home when she was 15 years old, and 3 years later, in around the year 2000, she began a relationship with a man called John Peterson. Whilst Claire was only 18, Peterson was 42 years old and had previously served in the Royal Navy. Peterson would later testify in court about Claire, calling her a, quote, she-devil, and saying, quote, she beat and battered me all the years I was with her, 4 or 5 times a week. She was horrible, a control freak who would flip all the time. She'd throw her shoes, punch me, have a go, and verbally abuse me for the least thing. If I went to the shops without her, she'd attack me. If I went to do the gardening, she'd do the same. I still have nightmares. However, this is where the story begins to get complicated, as it's important to point out that John Peterson was a convicted paedophile. Claire was fully aware of this, and not only stayed with him, but the pair had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. Social services became involved, and basically told Claire that she either needed to leave Peterson or lose the children. Rather than safeguarding her own children and doing what social services stated, she fled north, moving away to Newcastle, but taking Peterson with her. The pair finally separated in 2003, and Peterson only saw Claire after this, where she broke into his property with her new partner, Stephen Martin. Again, the story gets a bit complicated when it's pointed out that Martin had been the long-term partner of Claire's mother for around 7 years before they got together. So he basically moved from mother to daughter. The relationship between Claire and Steve Martin was on and off for around 6 years, with the pair regularly having sex, even if both were in relationships. Later, at court, Martin was found to have an IQ of 59, putting him in the lowest 1% of the population in terms of intelligence. It does appear that he was physically abused by Claire, but his main role was to cater to her every command. If Claire needed something, she would snap her fingers and he would come running. In 2005, during an apparent break in her relationship with Martin, Claire Nichols met Andrew Gardner. Apparently it had occurred when he was signing up for a learning disability course at the job centre. I want to break here to point out a few things. 3 things specifically. Firstly, it's clear that Claire was a violent, controlling monster in relationships, likely replicated the behaviours she herself had seen as a child. Secondly, is her complete disregard for the welfare of anyone but herself. She allowed her children to be around a sex offender, knowing full well about John Peterson's history. I don't know what previous offences Peterson committed, but in October 2021, he was jailed for 10 years for a historic sex offence where he raped a 5-year-old girl. So he was a dangerous predator who posed a risk to female children, yet Claire had children with him and allowed them, including 2 girls, to be around him. And instead of taking the advice of social services, ran off, taking her children and the paedophile with her. Clearly no one else mattered but Claire. She did not care what her children were exposed to. I was willing to place them at risk. Which brings me on to the 3rd point, the reason why she did this. I think that she stayed with Peterson because he was someone she felt she could easily control. He was a paedophile, likely vilified by everyone who knew him, and likely alone. Someone, she believed, if he reported anything, would not be believed, or potentially others would think he deserved it. She had leverage over him. If he displeased her, she could very easily disclose his offending to anyone she wanted, making his life hell. This fits within a pattern of targeting and beginning relationships with men who were vulnerable or had some other issue which she believed she could exploit. With Steve Martin, he had an extremely low IQ and was basically her lapdog. And then she met Andrew Gardner, who, as I said, she apparently met when he was signing up for a course where people would learn disabilities at the job centre. I can't help but draw the conclusion that Claire approached him and saw him as someone she could control and begin a relationship with for that purpose. Unfortunately, Andrew had no idea about Claire's background and walked into the spider's web. Soon after the relationship began, Andrew and Claire moved in together, and he became a surrogate father for her 3 children. Also living in the property was Claire's younger brother Simon, who was later around 19 or 20 years old when the relationship began in 2005. Simon was again a man of low intelligence, just the sort of person that Claire felt she could dominate, and therefore was useful to her. Within the family home, Claire was a monster, fully in charge. She would exert control any way she wanted and punish any dissent swiftly and forcefully. With her brother Simon, she would beat him if he didn't do household tasks to her satisfaction. However, the main abuse was reserved for Andrew. He was frequently beaten, and this carried on when Claire became pregnant with his child in around 2007. Andrew would be punched repeatedly if he tried to get anything to eat, with him needing to ask permission to eat the food in his own home. He was often starving, as Claire would sometimes forbid him from eating any meals for days, and he had to resort to taking food when she wasn't looking. She would then accuse him of, quote, stealing. Again, this is the food in his own home, and then he would be beaten. Claire went as far as ripping the pockets out of Andrew's trousers, so he could not conceal food from her. The last time that Ken and Jean Gardner, Andrew's parents, physically saw their son was in 2006, when he turned up at their door, looking malnourished and distressed. He was no longer the happy man they remembered. He'd been beaten down, and his spirit was broken. Despite trying to contact him over the years, they had no luck, and this was all due to Claire. She forbid Andrew from contacting his parents. In around 2008, Claire gave birth to a daughter. Andrew's first child, her 4th, and he was forbidden from taking this child to see his parents. In fact, it was not until after his death that Ken or Jean even knew they were grandparents. In July 2008, Claire, her brother Simon, Andrew, and the 4 children moved into 14 Arthur Street in the town of Chilton. It's here that Andrew would suffer a horrifying death less than a year later. Andrew was basically a prisoner in 14 Arthur Street. He was prohibited by Claire from leaving the house without permission, and it got to the point where the neighbours had no idea that Andrew was living in the property, as they rarely even saw him. Also, his parents didn't even know where he was living. Both Claire and Simon would beat Andrew, with Simon acting on the directions of his sister. Andrew was becoming increasingly emaciated, and he was starved for days, being beaten if he dared to take food from the house in order to keep himself alive. He was also forced to sit, watching the family eat a meal while he got nothing. Claire would also verbally abuse Andrew, telling him he was useless and a drain on the household. For some reason, in about February 2009, Claire told Steve Martin to move into the property, meaning that there were 8 people in this small house. After this point, the level of torture endured by Andrew escalated significantly. His final months were nothing short of a nightmare. The 3 of them took turns in torturing Andrew, with Claire coming up with various ideas about how to inflict as much pain on him as possible. Andrew had boiling hot water poured over him and was burnt on his body, especially his neck, with a cigarette lighter. He was forbidden from sleeping on a bed or sitting on a sofa. Instead, he was forced to sit and sleep on piles of newspaper, which would be used to soak up the blood from his injuries. Also, Claire would have said to Martin, right in front of Andrew, in order to cause him as much distress as possible. This catalogue of abuse is shocking enough, but it gets worse. It needs to be pointed out that the 4 children in the property were witness to all of this, and in an absolute sign of complete depravity, Claire directed her children, including the daughter she had with Andrew, to participate. These children were only 5, 7, and 9 years old. In court, Claire's 7-year-old son would state, quote, My ma'am got him and stamped on him. She does that because he's stealing food. He thieved a chocolate bar once. We hit him as well. I scratched him with keys and also hit him with my fists. We wrote swear words on his back. We do that in pen and nail varnish. All 4 children were encouraged to abuse Andrew, and this included cutting him with a knife. After his death, Andrew was found to have noughts and crosses carved into his body, which the children had done under the direction, for fuck's sake, which the children had done under the direction of their mother. Andrew was also whipped with wet tea towels, and his injuries later showed that he'd been cut with knives, including receiving a cut to his leg so deep that it exposed his tendons. Andrew was beaten mercilessly by all 3 adults in the home. At the beginning of March 2009, Claire started jumping up and down on Andrew with all of her might, causing severe fractures to his ribs. She would also jump up and then land on him with her knees. This caused severe internal injuries, and Andrew spent his last few days in agony. For approximately a week prior to his death, Andrew was unable to walk and was likely slipping in and out of consciousness in excruciating pain. It's believed that he was merely propped up against the wall, and it would have been clear he was dying, but no one came to help Andrew. Also remember that all 4 children would have seen this, including Andrew's daughter. Sometime in the late evening of the 12th of March 2009, Andrew suffered one final attack, when Simon and Martin held him down, and Claire again jumped on his ribs, as well as kneeing him in this area, with enough force to cause further rib fractures. She also kicked his already burnt feet, fracturing one of them. Sometime during, or immediately after this attack, his body gave out, and Andrew Gardner died. Paramedics who attended the scene on the 13th of March 2009 did not believe a word of what was said to them. Andrew had clearly suffered injuries over weeks and had not died due to some fight. The police reached the same conclusion, and Claire Nichols, her brother Simon, and Steve Martin were all arrested on suspicion of murder. The autopsy of Andrew Gardner took 7 hours due to the sheer number of injuries that needed to be documented. Andrew's body was found to have over 150 separate injuries, including numerous fractures, with 21 of these being to his ribs from where he had been stamped on. There was also bleeding on the brain from repeated head injuries. There were also injuries from where Andrew had been slashed with knives, whipped, and burned both with hot water and cigarette lighters. He also had bruises and scars all over his body, as well as blood poisoning. Despite being 35 years old at the time of his death, and 5'9", Andrew weighed just 120 pounds, or around 9 stone at the time of his passing. This was due to him having been starved for months. Andrew's injuries were so horrific that they were determined to have been akin to someone who had suffered a traumatic fall from a height or a serious car crash. Andrew's death was determined to have been primarily due to crushing chest injuries, which caused significant trauma to his organs, including his lungs and heart, as well as internal bleeding. Andrew essentially suffocated and bled to death. His final days would have been characterized by excruciating pain. All 3 suspects were interviewed, and both Simon Nichols and Steve Martin broke quickly, trying to save their own skins by pointing the finger at Claire. Simon and Martin both admitted they had physically abused Andrew, but they said that Claire was the ringleader and they were only following her directions, and they were both afraid of defying her due to her violent temper. Claire simply denied everything, claiming that in the hours prior to the 999 call being made, Andrew had been out and apparently been mugged. He then staggered home and collapsed. 30 minutes later, an ambulance was called according to her. However, it was clear that Andrew had been dead for hours by the time help was called. The evidence against the 3 was overwhelming, and they were all charged with the murder of Andrew and remanded into prison to await their day in court. On the 4th of January 2010, Claire Nichols, her brother Simon, and Steve Martin went on trial for murder at Teesside Crown Court, having pleaded not guilty to these charges. Simon and Martin essentially continued to dig themselves nice big holes amidst his acts of violence against Andrew, but pointed to Claire as the main instigator, and that they only did these things because they were afraid of her. They seemed to misunderstand that they were essentially admitting to their role in Andrew's death and just implicating Claire rather than actually proving their innocence. During the course of the trial, it's established that, whilst they may have been afraid of Claire, they made choices to become involved. In the case of Steve Martin, he'd been living away from the property and had moved into Arthur Street of his own volition. Claire twisted and turned during the course of the trial. She was initially determined to throw her brother and Martin under the bus, then reverse back over them. She continued to try and exert control over them, including shouting out that they were liars when they were giving evidence implicating her. Realising the writing was on the wall, Claire tried to claim that she had assaulted Andrew, but that his death was accidental, and therefore she was guilty only of manslaughter. This was rejected by the court. When she took the stand, Claire was ripped apart, making statements which were obviously bullshit and made no sense. On the stand, the prosecutor stated, quote, "Miss Nichols, you caused him that excruciating pain because you jumped on him with your knee, a technique you used." She responded by saying, quote, "I admit to jumping on him once. The rest of his broken ribs would have been caused by my brother Simon. I did not realise that my knee going into his ribs was going to cause him so much pain. So she kneed him in the ribs with enough force to break them, but didn't realise this would cause him pain." Absolute bollocks. On the stand, Claire showed herself to be a psychopath, a woman without remorse. Her crocodile tears were a facade, trying to gain sympathy from the jury and avoid taking any responsibility for the torture and murder of an innocent and vulnerable man. The jury saw through her lies, and all three were convicted of murder. On the 22nd of January 2010, Claire and Simon Nichols stood to be sentenced before Judge Peter Fox. His sentencing remarks noted that the death of Andrew Gardner was an act of sadism. He stated that Claire was a controlling, manipulative, callous and calculating woman who has a, quote, "deeply entrenched personality disorder." He said that she had set a, quote, "dreadful example for her children by exposing them to such serious acts of violence and encouraging them to assist in torturing Andrew. With regards to Simon, Judge Fox said that he had acted, quote, "knowing full well what your sister was doing to this man. You repeatedly were the enforcer, stepping in cruelly when he sought to resist or avoid her attacks." Judge Fox reinforced the findings of the pathologist that Andrew Gardner died in agony due to the extensive injuries he had suffered from weeks of torture. He concluded by stating, quote, "In the weeks prior to his demise on Friday, March the 13th last year, he was cruelly tortured and subjected to an appalling catalogue of attacks, which not only caused him acute pain in so many ways at your hands, but also dreadful humiliation. In your sometimes different, but sometimes joint ways, you each contributed not only to the breaking of his body, but also his spirit. In his final days, that he must have spent prone or leaning against a wall, he was deprived of all human dignity." He then sentenced them. For the murder of Andrew Gardner, Claire Nichols was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 32 years before she can apply for parole. Simon Nichols was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 25 years. Stephen Martin's sentence was delayed for various reports to be written, and on the 13th of February 2010, he too was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 20 years before he could apply for parole. All three subsequently appealed the length of their sentences, but all were rejected. This case just has layers of horror. This is again highlighted by how Ken and Jean Gardner found out about their son's death. They saw news about a man being found dead at a property in Chiltern, but had no idea that this was their son. As they did not know where he was living at the time, Claire made sure he was totally cut off from them. They then had to go through the horror of receiving a knock at the door and being told their son was not only dead, but had been the victim of domestic abuse for years, and his last few weeks on Earth had been marked by horrific acts of torture. A victim impact statement read out in court written by Jean stated, quote, "To be told that Andrew was dead was horrible. I knew there was something wrong straight away. He was someone who would simply walk away from trouble. To listen to the details of how he died and the suffering he went through was beyond belief. The thoughts of what went on at the hands and direction of that evil woman has left me with nightmares that will probably never go away. Andrew was a pleasant, caring, loving lad who kept out of trouble and was never violent to anyone. It hurt being here. It hurt watching her give evidence, so much so I had to go out of the courtroom. I knew she was lying. It's unspeakable what she and the others did. You don't do that to another human being. They've turned our family's lives upside down and left us empty shells. I called them evil to their face in court, but it hurt even more to see their smug reaction. No matter how long they're behind bars, the hurt they cause will never go away. It will be with me and my family forever. To highlight the man that Andrew was, in contrast to the monsters who robbed him of his life, it's assumed the reason why Andrew stayed in the property was for one reason, and for one reason only: the daughter he had with Claire. He was described as a, quote, doting father to his daughter. He loved her and wanted to be with her, and was not a man to abandon his responsibilities. His family believe, and I think this is true, that Andrew was unwilling to abandon his daughter, to leave her in the care of a woman as evil as Claire, and so he stayed, with him hoping, probably, that he could protect her from her sadistic mother. Unfortunately, this would cost him his life. It upsets me when people make comments saying, why did they not just leave, or why did they not see the red flags? I realise now I shouldn't be annoyed or upset. People don't necessarily understand domestic abuse and how insidious it is. Leaving is not that easy. Do you not think that someone whose whole purpose is to control their partner has not worked to cut every avenue of escape? When people say, why did she not leave him, or why did he not leave her, this suggests this person is the one making choices in a relationship, and this is missing the whole point. They've often been robbed of this choice, often because they're scared of what might happen to them, which is a well-founded concern, as in the UK, 2 women a week are murdered by their partners or former partners. So please, think what you write. Domestic abuse is much more complicated than you probably realise. I think this is important to point out because of Andrew. He was clearly isolated, alone with no money, and basically confined to the house. He had no means of escape. And this should be the focus. The fact that this poor man spent his final weeks being abused and tortured, and that he died alone, with this being the only escape from the horror he endured. I hope he's at peace. While 3 people were convicted of Andrew's murder, it's clear that Claire Nichols was the ringleader, so my focus will be on her. This woman is truly evil, a psychopathic sadist who clearly has no remorse or empathy or interest in anyone but herself. It's clear she's a woman who saw people in her life as a means to an end, things to be manipulated, used and abused. I don't have enough information about Claire's past to identify when or how she became this type of monster. But, like other people I've covered, like Catherine Knight, I think she despised men, saw them as beneath her, and therefore she was able to justify treating them in any way she wanted. She was also an utter coward, targeting the most vulnerable men she could find to do her bidding and to control, knowing that these individuals likely had significant difficulties in understanding the danger they were in and potentially did not have the ability to reach out for help or formulate a plan to escape. I have a particular disdain of people who target the vulnerable, for reasons that I'll probably get into at some point in the future. But basically, adults who I've met with learning disabilities have often been some of the purest, least pretentious people I've ever met. They're some of the most caring and kindest people. They see the world in such a different way, a way I would like to see it. It's a place of happiness and hope. So when these people are targeted, I feel truly sickened, as they often have no defense against the predators of this world, and their pure spirit and their personality, which more people should have, is destroyed. Andrew Garden was someone like this. Everything I've read about him says that he was a lovely man, someone who's honest, caring, trustworthy, and devoted to those he loved. He loved his daughter, and stayed and suffered the abuse, likely so that he could be near her, and tried to protect her. He wanted to bring happiness into the world, and he was targeted, abused, and murdered by a woman so weak that she needed to manipulate and control vulnerable men in her life in order to feel a sense of control. The part of this case which really, really gets to me, and which I think shows the utter depravity of Claire Nichols, is the issue of her children. As I already said earlier, she allowed them to be around a convicted paedophile, showing no regard for the potential harm this person could have caused them. But, worse still, she exposed them to horrific acts of violence towards Andrew, and even got them to be involved in his behaviour. None of these children were over the age of 10 years old, but her poisonous parenting meant that she'd made them believe that torturing someone was okay. However, I don't think she thought about this too much. She didn't give a shit about the lifelong trauma these children would have to deal with. Her only focus was on getting others to do her bidding. Also, Claire would have known as part of the trial prep that her 7-year-old son was going to be forced to testify, not only having to relive the horror that he'd seen in his home, but also having to admit that he had been involved in the abuse of Andrew. This would have no doubt re-traumatised his child, but Claire did not care. She was willing to throw anyone under the bus to save her own skin. As I've said repeatedly in my videos, the one constant is the link between childhood experiences and future criminal behaviour. In the case of Claire, all she taught her children was that violence and manipulation was acceptable, that people who you claim to love are allowed to be hurt, tortured, or even killed. I know it will never happen, but I really believe there should be some accountability for parents if their children go on to do horrific things and there is a link to what they're exposed to in the family home. Basically, if one of Claire's children becomes a domestic abuse perpetrator, etc., then I think she should be held accountable as well. I have no information about where her children ended up, but I pray they were taken away from the family altogether and placed with loving people who could try and undo some of the damage their demon of a mother caused. Not that Claire would ever admit any fault. She's a pathetic creature who, in my opinion, and this may be a little strong, should never have been a mother, and who should spend the rest of her life behind bars for the horrific torture and murder of Andrew. I'm not sure someone who does something like this, and whose personality is so clearly sadistic and psychopathic, can ever truly be considered to not be a risk to society. However, the question of whether she will be released or not is not something that will be addressed until approximately 2042, when she's able to apply for parole, when she's around the age of 60 years old. On February the 20th, 2015, Avon and Somerset Police in the UK received a phone call from the family of Becky Watts, who was just 16, saying that she'd gone missing. Within hours, an intense search was started, and desperate appeals were made by her family for information. However, by this point, she was already dead, having been murdered by her stepbrother, Nathan Matthews, a paedophile who had a fixation on petite teenage girls. As if killing her was not bad enough, she'd been dismembered, and the police captured him buying the circular saw he used for this sickening task. But he was not alone in his crimes. He was helped by his girlfriend, Shauna Hoare. This evil couple thought they were very clever and had gotten away with murder, but their lies were quickly uncovered, and their sickening crime and their pathetic attempts to manipulate the police were laid bare. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Rebecca Marie Watts, known as Becky, was born on the 3rd of June 1998 in Bristol, a city in southwest England. It doesn't seem like she had the easiest start in life, with her parents splitting up before she was born, and she spent the first few years of her life living with her mother, Tanya Watts. Becky was taken into care aged 3 due to concerns about neglect, before living with her father, Darren Galsworthy, and his partner, a woman called Angie Matthews, who had a son from a previous relationship, Nathan Matthews. Becky had delayed speech and didn't talk properly until she was around 3.5 years old, and tragically, her first proper word was apparently Nathan. Angie said that, although Becky was her stepdaughter, they were inseparable, and she loved her, and raised her as though she was her own biological daughter. Becky also had a close relationship with her biological mother, Tanya, despite not living with her, and they would see each other regularly. However, a lack of support during her vital early years meant that Becky struggled with various issues throughout her short life, including anxiety and self-confidence. Becky went to Summerhill Junior School, where her teachers remembered her as a quiet but happy pupil, with one teacher saying, quote, "She was incredibly shy and incredibly quiet, but by the end of year 5, she started to come out of herself." However, it was when Becky moved to secondary school at the age of 11 that she began to have difficulties. She was bullied, and comments were specifically made about her weight. This shattered Becky's already fragile self-esteem. When she was 13 years old, Angie called the local Children and Young People services and asked for help, as Becky was refusing to go to school. Various professionals engaged with Becky. She was showing a high level of defiance and aggression when challenged. It was clear this was a defense mechanism, as she developed a significant fear of people and places, and tragically, she was particularly terrified about being abducted, as she'd scared herself reading various stories on the internet. Becky also developed anorexia, and her issues meant that she was referred to a child psychologist and an eating disorder clinic to try and help her. In addition, Becky began engaging with the Hospital Education Service, a specialist service providing education for children who have mental or physical health issues, which mean they're unable to attend mainstream school. The combination of a new school environment and therapy meant that Becky started to get better. She was coping better when attending her classes, began to develop friendships, and began doing things that teenage girls did, like going out shopping with her friends and going to sleepovers. However, when she was 14 years old, concerns were raised again when Becky told teachers that she was being pressured into sending indecent images of herself to other boys, and they also wanted her to send explicit text messages. Becky was referred to services to provide support to children at risk of sexual exploitation. Unfortunately, whilst the focus of professionals was on protecting Becky from predatory males in the world, the most dangerous person in her life was someone she knew well, someone she called her stepbrother, Nathan Matthews, a disturbed and predatory paedophile who, rather than protecting her, would end her life. I usually refer to the offenders in my videos by their last name, but as one of their last names is Hoare, using this might distract from what I'm saying, so I'll just use their first names on this occasion. So, Nathan Charles Matthews was born on the 9th of January 1987 in Bristol to his mother Angie. He never knew his father. At around the age of 7 years old, Nathan went to live with his grandparents. Why he moved there is unclear, but it seems he had regular contact with his mother, and then eventually Becky Watts' father, Darren Galsworthy, when the pair began their relationship. His early years seem unremarkable. There may have been early warning signs suggesting the monster he'd become, but none of these are documented. As a teenager, Nathan joined an Army Cadet attachment at Cadbury Heath in Bristol. He seemed to enjoy this and was seen as a model cadet. During this time, he was given weapons training, but also, importantly for later, was taught how to deal with spillages, including using a product similar to cat litter to absorb liquid but also cover up odour. Nathan went on to study electrical engineering at the City of Bristol College before, at the age of 18 years old, joining the Royal Logistics Corps Army Reserves, training at the Maindee Barracks, Cardiff, so basically he was a part-time soldier. It was at this point where warning signs appear to have been noted. Nathan was described as a good soldier, but was also known to be, quote, stroppy, with a fellow squaddy stating, quote, he had a bit of an anger problem at times. He would sometimes snap in frustration and throw things in temper sometimes. It's also important to point out at this point that since he was a child, Nathan suffered from a rheumatic condition known as fibromyalgia, a chronic illness that causes pain and tenderness throughout the body. The severity of this condition varies from person to person, but in Nathan's case, it was sometimes severe and he would often be debilitated by pain. So it seems likely that Nathan was a man plagued by feelings of inadequacy and shame due to his height, with him being only 5'5", and his physical health issues. It seems that Nathan was a petulant, immature man who expected others to do what he said. He wanted to be in control of situations and people, as a way to feel powerful to offset the deep, dark hole of insecurity inside of him. As he got older, Nathan's behaviour in the family home also began to deteriorate. Initially, he and Becky appeared close, but he began to resent her. He was jealous of how close she was with Angie, and he looked for any opportunity to destroy her self-esteem. This included calling her fat, knowing full well that she was battling anorexia. The pair would have frequent arguments, and this included Nathan chasing Becky upstairs, shouting that he would kill her. Becky once told a psychologist that she was afraid of Nathan. However, it was what Nathan was doing in his private life which gives a window into his twisted mind. So from around his mid-teens, Nathan had developed an obsession with pornography and would spend hours at a time watching porn on his computer. He had a particular obsession with videos and pictures showing violent sex with females, and especially while they were restrained in some way. Evidence later showed they'd been watching videos where the scenario was men breaking into homes, tying up and raping the female occupants. He was also particularly fixated on legal pornography which fits under the umbrella of, quote, teen, where you have an adult actress clearly made to look younger than she is, so that some viewers can fantasize that she's a child while not getting into trouble for possessing this material. Despite his overt conflict with Becky, it's clear that he was also sexually attracted to her from a young age. It was later disclosed that he'd rubbed Becky's inner thigh in a sexual way when she was 8 years old, and he was around 20, and he'd apparently done this to two of her friends who were the same age. It's apparent that Nathan had fancies about controlling women and little girls, sexually violating them in order to take what he wanted and dominate them, and this extended to how he would act towards his partners. In around 2006, Nathan, then aged around 19 years old, began a relationship with a woman known only as KJ. She later reported to the police that Nathan was controlling and abusive in the relationship, demanding sex whenever he wanted, as well as controlling who she saw and what she did. He would always either need to be with her or in constant contact with her, questioning her on what she was up to. KJ managed to escape the relationship. I do not know how old KJ was, but it seems that she may have been an adult, or at least over the age of consent in the UK, which is 16. However, after KJ left him, it appears that Nathan began looking for teenage girls to start relationships with, and he was looking for those who were particularly vulnerable. No doubt he was doing this because he was sexually attracted to teenage girls, but he also thought it would be easier to control a child. In 2008, he met 14-year-old Shauna Hoare. Shauna Stacey Charmaine Hoare was born on the 12th of February 1994 in Bristol. Her childhood was extremely dysfunctional. Her father left the family home when she was very young, and her mother, Lisa Donovan, remarried soon afterwards. Before the age of 5, Shauna was taken into care due to concerns about neglect, emotional and physical abuse within the home. She was one of 8 children her mother had with 3 different men. Shauna moved from foster home to foster home, never settling in one place for very long. Eventually, Shauna returned to live with Lisa at home in Bristol when she was 13 years old. I don't have the information about what Shauna saw or experienced in foster care, but I imagine that this and her early years at home led to her becoming an extremely damaged child. By the age of 13 years old, she was smoking, drinking, and it appears sexually active, being preyed upon by older men. During this same year, the police received a report that she'd been raped on her way to school, but she refused to give a statement, so no one was arrested. Just a year later, when Shauna was 14, she met Nathan Matthews. How or where is unclear. Shauna's mother, Lisa, later recalled meeting Nathan, stating that he was, quote, controlling and flirty with everyone, sexually orientated, very overpowering. And this apparently included rubbing up against one of her other daughters, who was also a teenager. Unfortunately, this gives an insight into the environment and people which shaped Shauna. She was underage and brought a man round to the house who was around 21 years old at the time, and her mother apparently didn't bat an eyelid. Nathan told his mother and stepfather that Shauna was 16 years old, and despite any reservations they may have had, they tried to make Shauna feel welcome. She became part of the family, to the point where she was registered as Angie's carer due to her having multiple sclerosis. And when she and Darren got married in 2013, she was a bridesmaid, and this picture is truly horrifying, knowing that one of the people in this photograph would be dead less than 2 years after it was taken, and 2 others would utterly destroy the trust placed in them by Darren and Angie and tear the family apart. In order to fully understand the murder of Becky Watts and what happened afterwards, I need to explain the relationship between Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare, which began in 2008 and continued for around the next 7 years until their arrest. It was a complicated relationship, which, in my opinion, was characterised by a shifting dynamic that began with obvious one-sided abuse, but then devolved into something even more horrific. I want to be clear that by highlighting trauma in the backgrounds of the offenders in my videos, I'm not condoning their actions. I merely provide this information to help understand the people they were. Trust me, whilst I might empathise with the trauma in their lives, I've absolutely no sympathy for the crimes they commit. With that being said, it's clear that Nathan was abusive and controlling towards Shauna. She was not allowed to buy cigarettes and other items for herself, and had to ask him. When he would buy her things, he would expect her gratitude to be paid with sexual favours. Nathan would also demean Shauna, saying she was, quote, too fat and needed to lose weight. He directed what she could eat and when. He would also abuse her in front of other people, including one time when Nathan told her to, quote, shut the fuck up, you twat, when she tried to speak up about something. During the trial, one of Shauna's friends described Nathan severing the link between them and him making it very difficult for her to see her friends. If she did end up going out to see people, he would demand to always be there, and if it involved a drive, Nathan would demand that the person they were going to visit send him money to pay for petrol. Shauna later described the relationship as follows, quote, "I basically spent almost 6 years joined to him. One way or another, it was like I was going to be stuck like this forever, never able to go out, do anything." When she was 16, Nathan gave Shauna permission to go to college, where she wanted to study childcare, but he quickly changed his mind and forbid her from going due to his jealousy about her even speaking to other men. He and Shauna began living together from around 2010. Neither worked consistently and so relied on benefits, and their home, as shown later, was in a state of squalor. Behind closed doors, Nathan was also violent and frequently beat Shauna, with the most serious incident, which has echoes of his lace behaviour, involving him grabbing Shauna by the hair and then strangling her for several seconds. If Shauna tried to leave the relationship, Nathan would pull out every trick in the book to regain control over her, including trying to gain sympathy by self-harming. On one occasion, when she ended the relationship, Nathan stabbed himself with a fork and violently scratched his own face. As Shauna grew up, Nathan appears to have lost sexual interest in her and looked for other ways to get his kicks. One way was to ask Shauna to organise a threesome with one of her young-looking friends, which happened several times, with him filming this. However, he'd also tell Shauna about his fancies about abducting and raping teenage girls. Text messages recovered after both of their arrests show the sickening fancies that both appeared to have, with Shauna apparently encouraging Nathan and even trying to procure him potential victims. In November 2014, just months before Becky's murder, Nathan was working as a takeaway delivery driver when he delivered a takeaway to a 16-year-old girl's house. Obviously, due to having an order, he knew her name and began searching for her on Facebook. Messages show that Nathan gave Shauna her name and asked her to message the girl, which she did, apparently to try and convince her to come round so that Nathan could have sex with her. Whether she responded is not entirely clear, but on the 2nd of January 2015, Nathan sent the following message to Shauna saying, quote, "She came into the shop, but didn't speak to me. I didn't say anything to her either, as I was talking to a man. Laugh out loud, awkward." Police recovered a series of much more disturbing messages from the 9th of December 2014, which began with Nathan saying to Shauna, quote, "Fuck you, bring me back 2 pretty schoolgirls then." Shauna replied, "Laugh out loud, yeah, I'll just kidnap them from school." Later that day, Shauna sent Nathan a message saying, quote, "Just went to Cost Cutter and saw a very pretty petite girl, almost knocked her out to bring home, laugh out loud." Less than a minute later, Nathan wrote, "Don't you almost me, now fucking do it, bitch." Shauna said, "Laugh my fucking ass off, yeah? I'll just go back in time to when I saw her, time travel with her to our attic, laugh out loud." Police were able to track down both children and establish they'd not been harmed, but it became clear the resemblance that both girls had to Becky, and, generally, from the contents of his computer, it was apparent that Nathan was fixated with children who looked just like his stepsister. Living in squalid conditions, barely working, whilst watching pornography together and discussing Nathan's sexual fantasies, the topic of Becky inevitably came up repeatedly. Shauna would later state in court that Nathan said he, quote, "hated Becky." I think there are 2 reasons for this, compared to the bullshit he came up with in court. Firstly, her lifestyle. He was a man who demanded nothing, living in a shit tip. But Becky, the intruder in the family, was a beautiful 16-year-old girl with her life ahead of her, who was starting to overcome her difficulties and live her life. But I think he also hated that he could not have her. She was his sexual obsession, and not being able to have her was driving him crazy. So by early 2015, he devised a plan to take what he wanted by kidnapping and raping her and depriving Becky of the life he felt that he deserved by killing her. Shauna was inevitably a victim in this relationship when she was a child, the girl in the hands of a predatory, manipulative paedophile who ground her down, who spent significant efforts moulding her into the woman that she became. I think the repeated exposure to the sick, depraved man that Nathan Matthews is led to Shauna, who was already a very troubled person, developing horrific, distorted attitudes and beliefs, which meant that she shared his delusions that abducting, raping, and killing children was acceptable, and, like him, probably found these fantasies sexually arousing. This is known as a folie à deux and is something seen in other killer couples. However, regardless of whatever control and influence Nathan had over Shauna, I firmly believe that he simply built on something that was fundamentally missing within her all along, including a lack of conscience and a lack of empathy for others. I think this is shown by her cold and cat-fainted behaviour after the murder. I think looking a bit deeper into her background, you begin to see her own twisted behaviour before she'd even met Nathan. Specifically, people who knew Shauna when she was a child state that she was a compulsive liar. She would pretend to be pregnant and have cancer in order to gain attention. She was fully willing to manipulate others in her own right. I think one point which would likely guarantee any sympathy for Shauna is lost, and further epitomise the selfishness and horrific nature of the pair, is the fact that these two had a child together, a daughter. They themselves were parents. This is detail that doesn't appear in almost any newspaper article, but is confirmed by a serious case review that I've read, and Shauna herself in one of her police interviews. This child was born towards the end of 2012. I've got no other information, but even this speaks volumes. Despite being a mother herself, the parent of a female child, she was willing to help her partner rape and murder the child of another mother. Same logic applies to Nathan. It's clear they both didn't give a shit about this child, risking their daughter growing up without a mother or a father just so Nathan could get his kicks. So regardless of whether Shauna was a victim once upon a time, by the point of the murder she was a willing accomplice, a mother who decided that her and her partner's fantasies of raping and killing someone else's child were justified. The date chosen to abduct, rape and kill Becky Watts was the 19th of February 2015, and it's clear this date was chosen for a reason. Becky's father Darren would not be home, and Angie had a hospital appointment. Becky would be alone in the house. By this point, Nathan put together what was described in court as a, quote, kidnap kit. This included a large bag, stun guns, handcuffs, face masks, and duct tape. With everything in place, this evil pair put their plan into action. What happened to Becky Watts and the timeline can be established from various sources, including eyewitness testimony, police investigation, and even the statements of Nathan Matthews when he wasn't lying, which was rarely. What we do know is on the 19th of February 2015, Becky's father Darren Galsworthy was at work, and her stepmother, Angie Matthews, was picked up to go to a hospital appointment at around 10:30 a.m, leaving Becky in the house alone, with her being sat in her bedroom, texting her friends and her boyfriend. At 10:50 a.m, Nathan and Shauna left their home at 14 Cotton Mill Lane and drove towards 18 Crown Hill, Bristol, Becky's home address. This journey would only have taken 10 minutes, but they stopped at a local Tesco's to buy batteries for the stun guns. In the vehicle, strapped into her car seat, was the pair's daughter, who would have been around 2 years old at this point. Becky sent her final text message at 11:07, and it's assumed that Nathan and Shauna arrived soon afterwards. It's known that entry was gained to the house with a key that was left hidden outside for emergencies, and, by his later confession, Nathan put a mask on and went upstairs to Becky's bedroom. Whether Shauna also went up to the bedroom at this point is unclear. Nathan went into Becky's room and attacked her. Becky fought for her life ferociously, and her post-mortem showed that she had 40 bruises on her body from her attempts to fend off Nathan. He wrapped tape around her head and eventually placed his hand over Becky's mouth and nose, restricting her breathing until she suffocated to death. I imagine that, narcissist than he is, Nathan imagined walking into Becky's room, using his army trainings to subdue her, and then forcing her into the large bag he'd brought with him and taking her away to a separate location, no doubt to rape and eventually kill her. But he was as weak as piss, and no doubt overestimates his prowess and has to fight Becky every inch of the way. Now dead, Nathan put Becky's body in the bag, then was taken out of the house. In court, it was argued that, due to Nathan's physical health issues, he would have likely been unable to carry Becky's body without some sort of assistance. Therefore, it's apparent based on this that Shauna helped move Becky's body out of the house and likely helped him put her in the bag in the first place. The bag containing Becky's body was placed in the car boot, and at 12:45 p.m, when Angie returned from the hospital, she found Nathan, Shauna and her granddaughter in the property watching TV. A few hours later, Darren came home from work. Neither Angie or Darren had any idea that in order to get into the house, they'd walked within feet of Becky's body hidden in the car. Eventually, at around 7 p.m, Nathan and Shauna made their excuses and drove back home, taking Becky's body with them. When they got back to their own property, Becky's body was placed in the bath, and Nathan then stabbed her 19 times with a knife and also stabbed her in the neck with a screwdriver. No doubt this was him taking out his anger on her, that his plan had not worked, and she had fought back. How dare she not give him what he wanted? Becky's body remained in the bath overnight, and just after midday on the 20th of February 2015, Nathan was caught on CCTV buying a power saw, the tool he would use to dismember Becky. He then set about this gruesome task. In court, Nathan would claim when he did this, he, quote, closed my eyes, had the saw in one hand, with him implying that he was so disgusted with his actions that he could not bear to look and basically dismembered Becky blind. However, the prosecution noted that there was no damage to the bathtub itself. Nathan was fully in control and methodically cut up the body of his 16-year-old stepsister. That same day, Shauna made searches online, including going on YouTube and typing, quote, "Do you want to hide a body?" Sickeningly, what she was looking for was a spoof video of the song "Do You Want to Build a Snowman" from the film Frozen, which depicts two girls acting out a scene where they place a body inside a rucksack and sing lyrics such as, quote, "Will you help me hide a body? It doesn't have to be in one piece." So these two pieces of shit, whilst the dead body of a 16-year-old child was lying in their flat, were listening to a comedy parody song. This detail shows the absolute lack of remorse of this pair. They were no doubt exhilarated by what they had done, and like typical psychopaths, they obviously thought they were very clever and could easily get away with this. Becky's body was cut into 8 pieces, and her head, left arm, right hand, left hand, right leg, left leg and torso were all wrapped separately, being bound tightly in cling film, duct tape and parcel tape. Some of the parts were covered in table salt or cat litter in order to absorb any fluids and reduce the smell of decomposition. Becky's body was then placed inside 3 suitcases. On both February the 21st and February the 22nd, 2015, Nathan and Shauna were seen going to various shops, buying cleaning products to try and cover up the crime scene. Whilst Becky Watts was murdered on the 19th of February 2015, it wasn't until the 20th of February that she was reported missing to the police. This was apparently because her family assumed that she'd gone out on the 19th and then had simply decided to stay over at a friend's house. However, on the 20th of February 2015, Becky's boyfriend and her friends went to her house and said they were concerned. So it wasn't until 4 p.m. on the 20th of February 2015 that the police were called. They began the investigation immediately, and it soon became clear the circumstances of Becky's disappearance were suspicious, as she hadn't got any money with her, no change of clothes, and she hadn't told anyone where she was going. The police began searching the local area, including going house to house and searching open areas, including a local nature reserve. They took to social media, looking for information using the hashtag #FindBecky. On the 23rd of February 2015, Becky's father and stepmother, Darren and Angie, made an appeal for information about her disappearance, as shown by this clip.
She's your typical teenage girl. Lots of selfies, music, fashion.
Becky's father and stepmother told me today that her disappearance is completely out of character, and they are desperate for news.
Bex, if you can see this, get in contact. And if anyone out there knows something, just tell us. Just bring her home safe. If you've got her, then put her somewhere we can find her. We want her home, please.
She's not in trouble. She's just wanted here. We just want her back. That's all we want.
This clip is haunting, not only because, by this point, Becky was already dead and had been dismembered, but also because her son killed his daughter. Police quickly became interested in Nathan and Shauna, as they had been in the house around the time that Becky went missing. Initially, they were considered witnesses, and the police first contacted them on the 23rd of February 2015 to come in for interview. Alarm bells started ringing when both seemed not particularly bothered about prioritising trying to find Becky, with them stating they were too busy to come in. What the police later found out was that Nathan and Shauna were playing for time, as they knew the police were circling and they needed to get rid of Becky's dismembered body, which was still in their flat. So, on the evening of the 23rd of February 2015, Nathan called a friend of his, 29-year-old Carl Demetrius, and said that he would pay him to move and store the suitcases and other items at his home address. The sum promised was around £10,000. Carl then contacted a friend of his, 23-year-old James Ireland, who was promised around half the money to help Carl load the items in a van at Nathan's property and then unload them at the other end. Both of them travelled to Nathan's address, loaded up Becky's body parts in the van, and then drove back to 9 Barton Court, a property just 80 metres away. This was the property of Carl and his 23-year-old partner Dean Parsons, and the suitcases containing Becky's body parts were then hidden in their garden shed. In addition, items used in the initial crime, the dismemberment, and the clean-up were also hidden here. All three would later claim they had no idea what was in the suitcases and was simply focused on the money they had been promised, and, when pushed, said they thought it might have been drugs in the suitcases. With Becky's remains now out of the way, suddenly Nathan and Shauna made themselves available to the police, and they were interviewed twice, on the 26th of February and the 27th of February 2015. Both were cocky, confident, and especially related to Nathan, seemed amused by the whole situation, with him smirking during questioning and complaining about his back hurting and how being questioned was hurting his little brain. I'm going to show 2 clips. The first is part of the first interview with Shauna on the 26th of February 2015, which I've had to cut up because the sound goes completely haywire towards the end. The second clip shows part of her second interview the next day.
I think we got there about 11ish. The door was locked, so obviously we used a key from underneath the recycling bin. Got in, heard music upstairs, assuming Becky had been in then. I went into the kitchen to get a cigarette and went to go outside to have a cigarette. My daughter started whinging because she wanted to come out with me, so I took her down to the garden to help feed the rabbit while I had a cigarette. Probably was about 15-20 minutes. Then we came back up. I went into the kitchen to get a drink, I think I was, and wash my hands. Then I heard the front door slam. Carried on washing my hands, went into the living room. And then I think it wasn't until a lot later on that Angie asked me if Becky had gone out. And I said, yeah, I heard the door go. She must have gone out earlier. Washing my hands, I think I heard the door slam, front door. Again, I didn't look at the time or think anything of it, so I didn't really kind of like, oh, what was that? It was just the door, so Becky would have gone out.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I think I've accidentally got this in the wrong order here.
Okay.
You have to clarify this. So, right, let me just go back slightly then, if I could. The door slamming then. You've already said you got to go from the kitchen through to the living room.
Yep.
So, how far away from that front door would you be?
But you've got the front door, the living room, and about halfway up the hallway is the kitchen. So I would have been at the sink. So no distance, a reasonable amount, I'd say.
Okay. And immediately before this sound of the door slamming, what could you hear then?
I think it was just CBeebies again, to be honest. I was kind of more, trying to make sure I had vitamins back and getting my drink.
Yeah.
No, I heard stomping downstairs. That's what made me think that Becky had left in a mood. So I said to Angie, because obviously the door slammed, but I wasn't sure if that was the wind. I took it because there was like quite stomp downstairs. I assumed, she was in a bit of one of her tantrums.
Yeah. And then the only other thing was just a minor thing really, but I think some of our colleagues were trying to speak to Nathan just part of those initial inquiries just a few days ago on Tuesday, I think it was, and they sort of perceived a bit of reluctance. Do you have any knowledge of that?
Not to my knowledge, but I wouldn't know now.
No. Has Nathan had any sort of concerns about speaking to us?
Not that he's told me, no.
No.
If he does, I wouldn't know then.
Yeah. How is he finding it?
He's found it quite hard, actually. Again, he's kind of more thinking, my God, if it was... Or again, knowing how hard it'd be for his mum at the moment. You know, because Becky was almost like a daughter to her.
Yeah.
You know, when it is.
And then over the weekend, have either you or Nathan been involved in searching for Becky or doing any
No,
of that
I wasn't
stuff
aware
that's
they were
going
doing
on?
a search. I didn't realise until, I think it was yesterday.
Yeah.
I went on my Facebook and obviously there was news articles and pictures popped up about that they did the search. But we weren't told about it at all.
Well, that's fine. I know. Okay, so
Yeah.
to Nathan, that's actually a good thing. Where did you guys go then over the weekend? I don't know if you're able to remember that far back.
Well, the weekend that Becky, like after
So
Becky...
after Becky went missing, I think if I help you, so I think it was on Monday actually that you spoke to police officers, like detectives.
Which would have been outside my mum's house.
That's right.
So I would have went to my mum's that day.
So that was on Monday.
I think I went over on Tuesday.
Where did you stay on Monday night? Do you remember?
It would have been at my house, but we didn't leave until about midnight, to be honest.
So that's about midnight
Yeah,
Monday. and
most
then-
nights we did. Tuesday we went over again.
Yeah.
Again, probably would have left about midnight.
Yeah.
Wednesday, I think we stayed in my house. We might have gone over again Wednesday, actually, sorry, I think. Thursday, which was yesterday.
That was yesterday.
Yeah, we had the interview, and then obviously we've gone over again
Night.
today.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Wednesday we started watching a film or two films that my mum's fell asleep and we didn't leave until like 2 o'clock in the morning or something.
On Wednesday.
Yeah, that was it.
Into
Yeah.
Thursday, yeah.
And then Thursday we obviously had the interview, and then today.
I'm sure you picked up on a few things. The complete lack of any emotion, any care or concern.
I believe that Shauna has the ability to express these emotions and doesn't understand them, hence why her presentation is so bizarre. I mean, your partner's stepsister, who you know well, has gone missing. You didn't realise people were out looking. I don't know about you, but if someone I cared about went missing, you couldn't drag me away from searching every single nook and cranny.
I'd be pounding the streets every minute of every day. The police also noticed this strange presentation, as well as the fact that Nathan and Shauna's stories match perfectly. Human memory is bad. People can have widely different recollections of the same incident, so having two people give exactly the same story is suspicious, and it was clear they'd both come up with the story and rehearsed it, which was basically they went to the house, didn't see Becky, but heard the door slam, so assumed that she just left. I imagine it was at this point the police knew that Becky was not alive anymore, and they had spoken to the people responsible, but they needed evidence to make the arrest. Police returned to Becky's property and found a small amount of blood outside her bedroom door with a fingerprint in it. The blood was found to be Becky's, and the fingerprint belonged to Nathan. This was enough, and Nathan and Shauna were arrested for kidnapping on the 28th of February 2015, and, with their in police custody, their house was forensically examined. These photos show the inside of the property that Shauna and Nathan and I assume their daughter lived in. It's actually disgusting. There's piles of rubbish everywhere. However, the police noticed the bath was actually spotless. By making this one area spotless, it acted like a massive beacon, and the police knew that someone had gone to great lengths to clean this room for some reason, and obviously it would later be discovered that Becky had been dismembered in the bath. The pair had spent days cleaning up the horrific scene. Police also found receipts for the circular saw used to dismember Becky, as well as gloves, goggles, and other items used in this despicable crime. On the 2nd of March 2015, both Nathan and Shauna, who remained in police custody, were arrested on suspicion of Becky's murder. On the 2nd of March 2015, after days of questioning, with all the evidence stacking up against him, Nathan Matthews gave the following prepared statement to the police, which reads, quote, "I, Nathan Charles Matthews, date of birth 9th of January 1987, accept that I am responsible for the death of Rebecca Watts. On the 19th of February 2015, I attended 18 Crown Hill with my girlfriend Shauna Hoare. 18 Crown Hill is where my mother lives with Darren Galsworthy. Rebecca Watts also lived there. Shauna is my mother's registered carer, so we regularly go to the house to help with housework and help with my mother's needs. Although we usually went on Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays, we'd also go there on other days. On Thursday the 19th of February, part of the reason for going around was to return a tin to my grandmother. My grandmother was due to take my mother to a medical appointment and bring her back. In my car, I had a large bag, a stun device, handcuffs, tape and mask. I developed an idea to scare Rebecca by kidnapping her. I wanted to kidnap her to teach her a lesson. I believed that she was selfish and her behaviour towards my mother was a risk to her health. When we got to 18 Crown Hill, we let ourselves in with a key my mother had left in the recycling box. Upon entering the property, we all went to the front room. A few minutes after arriving, Shauna said she wanted a cigarette and went to the garden. I went to the boot of my car and took out a bag which contained the other items. I took everything upstairs to the landing. I think I then took the items out of the bag before knocking on Rebecca's door. She replied, "What?" or "Hello?" and I said, "Can I see you a minute?" or similar words. Rebecca then opened the door. I am wearing a mask. I cannot be sure in what order things happened immediately after she came to the door, but I used the items I had to subdue Rebecca. During a short struggle, my mask slipped and Rebecca was able to see my face. This caused me to panic and I strangled her when she was partially in the bag. I collected the items I'd used, put them and Rebecca into the bag and zipped up the bag. I also took her phone, tablet and laptop together with shoes, some clothes and a duvet cover from the spare room in a separate bag. I took everything downstairs. I put it into the boot of my car. Back in the house, I waited to hear Shauna, then slammed the front door shut. Before going to the front door, I checked that Shauna was not in that room. The rest of the day at the house goes as it would normally if we were there. We leave at around 7 p.m. The rest of the evening passed as usual, but I cannot remember exactly what we did. After Shauna went to bed and sleep, I waited a while, went out to the car and brought the bags into the house. The following day, we went back to 18 Crown Hill and I tried to behave as normal. I tried to behave as normal as I could. When we returned to 14 Cotton Mill Lane, I again waited for Shauna to go to sleep. This time, I collected the bag of Rebecca's body and placed it in the bath. In order to stop Shauna using the bathroom the following morning, I poured drain cleaner down the toilet so I could tell Shauna it was blocked again. The toilet would often get blocked, and when this happened, I knew Shauna would not go into the bathroom. I also locked the door. My memory of the days that followed is not perfect, so I'm not sure which day I returned to 14 Cotton Mill Lane, having left Shauna at her mother's, but I think it was the Saturday. When I got back to 14 Cotton Mill Lane, I tried to dispose of the body by cutting it up with a circular saw. Initially, I wrapped up the body parts and took them downstairs and hid them. I'm not sure how many days later, but on another day, I took the body, the saw, and other items to 9 Barton Court, Barton Hill, and placed them in a garden shed. I took them to this address with 2 other people. I did not tell them what was in the bags and box, and I said I would collect them in a few days. Both these people are men, but I do not want to name them. I've chosen to give my account by means of a written statement because I believe I have mental health and learning difficulties that make it difficult for me to say it out loud. So to summarise, Nathan is claiming manslaughter. He had some ridiculous plan to kidnap Becky to teach her a lesson because she was being mean to his mother. She struggled and he strangled her in a moment of panic. Also note that he's trying to claim Shauna is innocent and had nothing to do with any part of this, which is ridiculous, as I've already hinted at but will return to in a bit. This confession is so stupid. I mean, literally, he should have just written the word derp on a piece of paper and it would make more sense. Anyway, this clip shows around 10 minutes of the interview with Nathan, when the police then tried to question him about the statement he had made. This is one of the most pathetic interviews I've ever seen. This is a man who methodically cut his 16-year-old stepsister into pieces and was smirking during his first police interviews, but now Notice the change in him. Notice the performance, the manipulation. Now he's poor little Nathan. He did a bad thing because Becky was being mean to everyone. Oh, and he has mental health issues and learning difficulties, don't forget. And he's very, very upset. I'm really sorry.
This interview is being recorded at Patchway Police Station in Bristol. It is now Tuesday, the 3rd of March 2015, and it's exactly 12 midday. I'm DC 3302, Marie Stephen, and the other police officer present is
DC Mark Luther 2702.
Nathan, can you give us your full name?
Nathan Charles Matthews.
Thank you. And your date of birth?
The 9th of the 1st, 1987.
Thank you. And the other people present in the interview are?
Robin Rowland on behalf of Crossroads Solicitors.
And Liz Warlock, appropriate adult.
Thank you. So Nathan, we've had a short break. Perhaps if I just flag up for the recording what this interview is about. It's about the kidnap and murder of Becky Watts. Over the last couple of days we've had 4 recordings. The last was a very short recording, and I know you needed to have a break then. I explained to you this morning why we needed to, rather than simply take at face value the written statement that you have given to us last night, that we need to explore what you've told us some more. I know that was difficult for you first thing this morning, but that's what we need to carry on and do, and ask you some more questions.
Can you rephrase? I don't know what questions you need to ask, but obviously you said something about Shauna. Can you rephrase it? So you can include basically everybody in it and not use her name. Like,
do you want me to say
like
the other person? Is it just saying the name?
Just include everybody in it. Like, obviously she's in. Obviously we'll be included in it, but include everybody and say her name.
Okay. Okay. I'll do my best to avoid using that name where I can, Nathan, okay? I can't make promises, and what I would say to you is that I'm not going to be doing anything to deliberately wind you up or anything like that, okay? But we've obviously been here a long time, and if I make a slip up, it may well be because I'm tired and those things happen, okay? Can you tell me then, Nathan, because if we work through what you told us in this written statement, this idea that you had...
Obviously used, I think you wanted more detail,
yeah.
was it?
Yeah, I do.
Obviously I should be able to go into more detail.
Remember the discussion we had before coming in, though?
Huh?
Remember the discussion we had before coming in?
I don't know.
There are a couple of
Are
ways...
Are you gonna have to read that statement?
No. There are a couple of ways we could get around this.
Obviously, I don't want that to be read to someone.
I don't want to read this out in full again, Nathan, but what I wanted to do was get some more detail from you about things that you've said in it. So perhaps if I could pull out some things from what you've told us and ask you to expand on it, tell us a bit more. Does that sound all right? How about if we start with this idea you had about scaring Becky? Tell me about how that started up then, how you got that idea.
I don't know if it was on TV or something like that, but obviously I had a couple of dreams about...
I think at this point, I can't keep interrupting, but do you remember the discussions we had before you came into interview? And how you and I discussed you dealing with the interview?
What was the question again?
About the idea that you got, and you said it might have been something on TV or you had a dream.
Well, obviously I came up with the idea to scare her, because, like, to try and basically make her more appreciative of life, so she'd be more appreciative for other people. She'd be, like, grateful that, you know, she wasn't harmed or anything like that, or, you know, because obviously she'd leave things out on the floor for my mum to trip over, and obviously would talk to her, like, so saying nasty comments and talk to her like dirt on the floor. And obviously I thought if I was, you know, able to scare her, and obviously her not be harmed and obviously be released, obviously when she got back she obviously would have been scared and more appreciative of things, as people are.
Okay. So tell me what you thought you were going to do. What your plan was.
So obviously stick her in the suitcase. Obviously, put tape around her mouth so she wouldn't make any noise. And then...
I don't want to interrupt you, Nathan, but just one thing, it might be difficult to hear this later. Do you reckon you could speak up a bit?
Obviously, the plan was obviously once I got her in the car to make up something to say to Shauna, obviously I had to leave, like to help someone or do something or something. And obviously I was gonna I was thinking of like a wooded area or whatever to obviously take her back out, obviously still have the mask on, and obviously like scare her and, you know, say something along the lines of, you know, you got to start treating people better, you know, not being a bitch or self-centered, and then like make a threat of you know, or this could happen again or worse or something like that. And obviously I hadn't figured out exactly how to obviously walk away after, without obviously, I don't know if she'd try and follow. I'm assuming she wouldn't have followed, because out of fear we wouldn't want to follow someone who just obviously has done that, and obviously would have come back. Well, I would have obviously chucked away obviously everything first and then come back, and obviously would have acted as normal. That come back to my mum's, obviously acted as normal.
So when did you think all of this up?
I can't be certain. I'm no good with dates. I've said this repeatedly, and days muddle into other days. I don't have a specific memory of coming up with it, but I remember thinking about it a couple of times. Just basically trying to think of ways to because obviously she won't listen to me about leaving shit on the floor for my mum to trip up on. She doesn't listen to her dad about it. Just trying to find a way of making her actually listen.
Had you had a conversation with her soon before that?
I can't remember when I last saw her. Like I said in the statement, it could have been Wednesday when we went over, or it could have been the Monday before. It depends on when she was in and when she wasn't in, and if she was in, it depends on when she would have come down.
Nathan, do you think you want some legal advice at this stage, given that this is going differently than we discussed?
I don't know, probably here.
Okay. It's 12:11 p.m.
Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. The whiny noises that come from this creature, with him clearly trying to gain as much sympathy as possible. Nathan's quote-unquote confession meant that finally, on March the 3rd, 2015, police attended the home of Daynes Parsons and Carl Demetrius at 9 Barton Court, arrested them both for assisting an offender, and recovered the suitcases containing Becky's remains from the shed in their garden. They also recovered suitcases and a rucksack that contained, amongst other things, the power saw, blood-stained safety goggles, a screwdriver, handcuffs, blood-stained drain cleaner bottles, blood-stained pliers, and face masks. Later, in Nathan Shaughner's property, a stun gun was recovered. Based on the discovery and his confession, on the 4th of March 2015, Nathan Matthews was charged with the murder of Becky Watts and remanded into custody to await his day in court. Shaughner was charged with perverting the course of justice, basically lying to the police about Nathan's movements, and she was remanded into prison, but this was clearly a holding charge. They knew she was involved and just needed the evidence to prove it. This clip shows part of an interview with Shaughner after the discovery of Becky's body, where she denies and deflects and claims no knowledge of anything, no matter how obvious this lie was.
Is there anything else in relation to Becky's body being found at your house?
If they found at my house, do you know where she was found?
No. Would you know that?
No. That was why it's more of a curiosity. I don't know where he would have hid her, so to speak. I don't know.
Okay. Claire, have you got anything to?
Yeah. If I know that you've said about I wouldn't have any evidence on her, no hair, no skin cells or things like that. But that doesn't stop you from not, because you might not have touched, but you not knowing. I'm trying to rephrase this. That doesn't stop you from actually knowing that she was there.
Again, I
Do
could
you understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
I suppose there's no reason that you should or shouldn't believe me. I can just obviously tell you that I genuinely had no idea. I can't even look at him. I was sat in the courtroom today and I just wanted to, I say kill him, that's a bad choice of words. I felt sick looking at him, knowing what he did. And yeah, I didn't always like Becky, but she was a nice enough girl. She was so young.
Shaughner didn't realise that she just walked herself into a trap. By claiming that she had not touched anything, if her fingerprints or DNA could be found on any items recovered, they could prove that she was lying. Also, as already outlined, there's clear evidence of them discussing abducting teenage girls, which the police already knew about. Police got a break when they found Shaughner's DNA on one of the face masks they recovered, as well as on one of the cases containing Becky's remains and on bin bags used to wrap her body. So, on the 22nd of June 2015, Shaughner Hall was also charged with Becky's murder and remained in prison to await her fate. Nathan Matthews and Shaughner Hall went on trial on the 6th of October 2015 at Bristol Crown Court. The pathetic waste of skin called Nathan continued with his fucking ridiculous story. This intention was to kidnap Becky in order to teach her a lesson, and that she had been killed whilst trying to do this. He continues to claim that Shauna had no part in this. Shauna echoed this, playing dumb and pretending she had no idea what had gone on. The prosecution had a wealth of evidence to prove their case, that this was a, quote, sexually motivated kidnap plot carried out by Nathan and Shauna. Their defences fell apart quickly when it could easily be proven that Nathan had a sexual interest in children, especially ones who looked like Becky, and he and Shauna had discussed about kidnapping a teenage girl. With regards to Shauna, her DNA was found on items that she couldn't possibly have touched unless she was involved. Also, there was the ridiculous idea that she would not have heard a young girl fighting for her life or questioned Nathan carrying a large, heavy bag randomly out of the property on the day that she visited. In addition, as already mentioned, the prosecution argued that Nathan would have needed help moving the body, and this would have come from Shauna. Adding to this, Shauna was shown to be with Nathan during the time he'd been dismembering Becky's body, and not at her mother's. She also went with Nathan to various shops to buy cleaning products, claiming that she didn't know what this was for. Lastly, there was also her online internet activity, including finding a parody song which referenced hiding a body. The case was so strong that it only took the jury 3 hours to find Nathan Matthews guilty of the murder of Becky Watts, and due to her role, Shauna Hall was found guilty of her manslaughter. In addition, both were convicted of conspiracy to kidnap, perversion of the course of justice, preventing the lawful burial of a body, and possession of 2 stun guns, whilst Nathan was also convicted of possession of indecent images of children. In addition, Jadine Parsons and Carl Demetrius, the couple whose shed was used to hide Becky's body, were convicted of assisting an offender, and Jadine was subsequently sent to prison for 16 months. Carl was sent down for 2 years. With regards to Nathan and Shauna, on the 13th of November 2015, they stood before Mr. Justice Dingmans for sentencing. He was barely able to contain his emotions and was later seen to leave the court in tears. He stated that Nathan and Shauna's crimes, including dismembering Becky, were actions that, quote, defy any reasonable explanation. He highlighted the clear sexual motivation for this crime, and whilst there was no evidence to indicate that Shauna had actually been the one to kill Becky, she was shown to be an integral part of this plan. He also said, quote, Mr. Matthews and Miss Hall lied to the family and to the police, pretending not to know anything about Becky's whereabouts at a time when they were in the process of dismembering her. Their deceit to the family was particularly cruel and unusual, and the family's sense of betrayal by Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hall is both understandable and justified. At the same time they were deceiving the family, Matthews and Hall were watching a parody of a song from Frozen, using the words, "Do you want to hide a body?" It's apparent that neither Nathan Matthews or Shauna Hall have truthfully said what happened at 18 Crown Hill to Becky, and I understand the family's sense of frustration about that fact. He then sentenced them. For the murder of Becky Watts, Nathan Matthews was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 33 years before he's eligible to apply for parole. For the manslaughter of Becky Watts, Shauna Hall was sentenced to 17 years imprisonment. Both later appealed their sentences, but they were both denied. People who offend against children are considered the lowest of the low in prison, and some measure of retribution was waiting for Nathan and Shauna after they were sentenced. With regards to Nathan, in January 2017, he was reported to have been badly burnt when another inmate threw boiling hot water over him at the high-security prison H&P Long Lartin. Shauna appears to have had an even worse time than Nathan. In 2016, it was stated that she'd been beaten so badly by other inmates that she'd had to be resuscitated twice. It appears, though, that Shauna survived prison, and given she would have had to have served half her sentence before being released on licence, and taking into account time on remand, she's likely already out of prison or will soon be released on licence to be monitored by probation for the next 8.5 years. No doubt she'll have to keep a very low profile now and for the rest of her life. Nathan has another 25 years before he can even apply for parole if he survives that long. But, given the heinous nature of his crimes, whether he will ever be considered safe to be released is unclear. Becky Watts was laid to rest on the 17th of April 2015 at St Ambrose Church in Whitehall in Bristol. Hundreds of people lined the streets, and, at a request from her family, many wore t-shirts featuring her photograph and threw pink roses towards the horse-drawn carriage which took her on her final journey. Becky's grave was decorated with blue chippings, her favourite colour, and the inscription on her gravestone reads, quote, "Bristol's Angel, Becky, Rebecca Marie Watts, beautiful, affectionate, talented, loyal daughter and friend, taken from us 19th of February 2015, age 16. Bex was loved by everyone, will be missed by all who knew her. Rest in peace, my child." Tanya Watts, Becky's biological mother, did not feel able to attend the service, who paid tribute to her daughter by calling her a, quote, "caring, normal, happy, lovely girl," as well as saying, "You shouldn't have to bury a child. There are lots of people on this earth who don't deserve to be here, but Becky weren't one of them. She should be here." Her father Darren and her stepmother Angie were devastated by Becky's death and the ultimate betrayal of both Nathan and Shauna. Darren subsequently released a statement speaking for both he and Angie, which read in part, quote, "We both feel we are just marking off time until our demise. Everything beautiful in our lives has been ripped from us in one selfish act of violence. The pain cuts deep into our families. It's destroyed long-standing relationships and marriages. Our children have become isolated and bullied at school. We can't go outside of the house without people pointing at us or making comments which they believe we can't hear. When I close my eyes to sleep, I see Becky's death over and over again. I see what they did to my child. I hear her cry out, 'What are you doing?' Then I feel her terror as she realizes they're not going to stop, and she is about to die. I feel her heart racing. I see all this, and I'm powerless to help her. All too frequently, I awake drenched in sweat and physically shaking. Becky was so small and fragile, she never stood a chance. These nightmares consume my every thought. Like advanced cancer, they haunt my days and terrorize my nights. This is the reality of what transpired that day, a legacy I cannot escape. This is my life now." Darren also spoke later about seeing his daughter for the last time, and despite the efforts of the morticians who had sewn Becky back together and wrapped the cuts in bandages, he said he could still see where his daughter had been decapitated. Angie's health declined rapidly after this point, losing the girl she loved like a daughter and raising a monster of a son who could do this. She completely cut Nathan out of her life. I have no real updates about either Darren or Angie. I know they remained married for several years after this incident, but I'm not sure where they are now. However, what is known is that a beautiful young woman who had so much of her life ahead of her was murdered, taken from this life before she'd even had a chance to live it. She wasn't just taken away from her loved ones, but she was robbed of her opportunity to have a family. They destroyed all the laughter, the joy she would have had, her chance to make a mark on the world, which I've no doubt she would have done. Becky, with all my heart, I hope you're at peace. Sleep well, Angel. It's impossible not to talk about these two together, but I'll also discuss differences in their profiles. Nathan Matthews, in my opinion, is much easier to understand. A sad little man who, likely due to his own inadequacies, including his height, wanted to dominate and control women as a way to feel powerful. He likely felt that on a level, he was no match for a woman, had little to offer them, and they would inevitably abandon him. So he targeted children. He knew these individuals would be more naive than him, and he could mold them into what he wanted them to be. Becky was a precocious teenager who knew her own mind, had a strong personality, and was going places compared to him. A man who could not hold down a job, who lived in absolute squalor. This disparity enraged him. He was also sexually obsessed with her and wanted to dominate her and take what he believed he was entitled to. His plan would enable him to achieve both of these goals, use Becky sexually and remove this object from his life. And I say object purposefully. I have no doubt that Nathan is a psychopath. He has no remorse for his actions. So will Becky, and all women and female children simply as things he could use. He methodically dismembered the body of a 16-year-old child and then sat in an interview with the police smirking. Only when he was trying to save himself did he show any sort of emotion, and this was manufactured, a pantomime, with his sole purpose being to sell this bullshit story to save his own skin. Nathan Matthews is a dangerous man who I think will always pose a risk to children. In some respects, I find the profile of Shauna Hall more interesting, as it is, in my opinion, far more complex. I've said what I thought about her during this video, with Shauna being a victim initially, falling into the hands of a manipulative, controlling predatory paedophile who moulded her for years, contributing to the monster she became. However, the more I watch her interviews, the more I'm convinced that Nathan merely built upon something that was already within Shauna, or, to be more accurate, missing from her. She is cold. There is something missing when she speaks. She talks, but there is no emotion there. She's literally like a robot. She shows no signs of distress and seems incapable of even pretending to care during her police interviews. I think she too is likely a psychopath, who over the years began to become sexually aroused by thoughts of abducting children for Nathan to abuse. The thing that I think cements my perception of these two as psychopaths is, as I said, the fact they were parents themselves to a female child. Especially with Shauna. The coming-on mother appears to have done nothing to change her. She did not then realise the love that other mothers have for their children, and how losing a child is the worst thing a parent can experience. She gave no consideration to keeping that child out of harm's way, or being in their life. No, instead, she allowed them to live in absolute squalor, and took them to an address knowing exactly what was going to happen, and then, likely, had this child in the house where Becky's body was cut up. The same thing goes for Nathan. He couldn't give a shit about anyone else, including his daughter. His need to indulge his sick sexual interest in children was all that mattered. I've read that Shauna was apparently pregnant again with twins when Becky was murdered. So, again, rather than thinking about the lives inside of her and her own daughter, she was slowly focused on helping her paedophile partner end the life of someone else's child. As to what happened to these twins, a report in late 2015 said that Shauna was, quote, no longer pregnant. It's unclear whether she had termination, lost the babies, or potentially she was never pregnant at all, and simply said this to gain sympathy. In addition, I have no idea what happened to the couple's daughter. She'll be around 10 years old now, and I really hope that she's being supported by people who love her, and they'll help her with the emotional fallout when she finds out what monsters her parents were. Shauna, as I said, is either released or will soon be back in the world, and she will have to keep a low profile and look over her shoulder for the rest of her life. And Nathan, he gets to enjoy at least the next 25 years with his new friends. Let's see how that goes. There are clear parallels between this case and the Ken and Barbie murders. This case relates to a couple, Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo. Bernardo was a serial rapist and serial killer who killed at least 3 young women, with Carla assisting him with finding him victims, including her 15-year-old sister, Tammy. I will be covering that case in the near future.